Welcome to the world of Dreamside Traveler. Here, beneath the soothing sound of gentle rain, we journey through time and space, uncovering the mysteries of the past and diving into the most captivating pages of human history. This place is created for those who love exploring the world in the quiet of evening, for those who value peace while yearning to discover something new before sleep. If you enjoy what you're hearing, please give this video a like. It helps other people find our stories. Help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers in our club of nighttime history lovers. And the Dreamside Traveler channel will become your faithful guide to sleep. We're constantly adding new stories for your peaceful evenings. And if you have ideas about which historical topics interest you, or simply want to share your thoughts, leave comments below the video. I'm genuinely curious to know what inspires you. Now close your eyes. Feel this gentle rain outside your window. Allow yourself to relax. Our journey begins right now. On a crisp, snowy day, November 19th, 1831, a boy was born in a humble log cabin in Orange Township, Ohio. His name was James Abram Garfield. Little did anyone know that this child, born into a life of hardship, would one day rise to become the 20th President of the United States, leaving behind a legacy marked by intellect, compassion, and a tragically short-lived presidency. James' father passed away when he was just 2 years old, leaving his mother, Eliza, to raise him and his older brother on her own. The family lived in poverty, struggling to make ends meet. They survived on what little they had, using firewood to heat their home and making do with what the land provided. Young James worked on a canal boat and for a time dreamed of a life at sea. But illness intervened, and his dreams of the ocean were cut short. Despite the poverty that surrounded him, James' mind was insatiable. Books became his refuge. He taught himself Greek and Latin, languages that would become the foundation for his academic success. With determination and perseverance, he worked his way from manual labor to academic excellence. He attended Western Reserve Eclectic Institute, later renamed Hiram College, and graduated from Williams College in Massachusetts. Returning to Hiram College, Garfield began his career in education. First, he served as a professor, then became president of the college, demonstrating an ability to lead and inspire. But it was in the realm of politics that Garfield's true calling was realized. In 1859, he entered the Ohio Senate, and by 1863, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. During his 17 years in Congress, Garfield became one of its most respected intellectuals, and a fierce advocate for issues such as abolition, civil rights, fiscal conservatism, and education reform. Garfield's mind was extraordinary. He could write Latin with one hand and Greek with the other, simultaneously. But his intellectual prowess wasn't confined to academic matters alone. He was deeply involved in the political and social issues of his time. A gifted orator, he stood firm on the issues that mattered most to him, such as the abolition of slavery and the fight for civil rights. He also worked tirelessly to modernize the country's military and improve the nation's educational system. But it was his role in the Union Army during the Civil War that truly demonstrated his leadership. Rising to the rank of Major General, Garfield earned praise for his leadership in battles like the Battle of Middle Creek. In 1880, when the Republican National Convention convened, Garfield attended with the intention of nominating another candidate. However, after 36 ballots and growing division within the party, the delegates turned to Garfield as a compromise candidate. Astonished, he found himself nominated for president. He ran a low-key campaign, holding what became known as a front porch campaign, where he delivered speeches from his home in Mentor, Ohio, to the crowds gathered in his yard. Despite his low-key approach, Garfield won the election by a narrow margin. At 49, Garfield became the youngest president elected at that time. He entered the White House with grand ambitions for reform and unity. One of his first actions as president was to challenge the corrupt spoils system. Instead of appointing officials based on political loyalty, he chose individuals based on merit, an approach that angered many party insiders. He also pushed to modernize the Navy and advocated for civil service reform, seeking to create a more efficient and effective government. Garfield also stood firm in his support for black suffrage, working tirelessly to protect the rights of African Americans in the South. However, Garfield's presidency was cut short by tragedy. On July 2nd, 1881, just 4 months into his presidency, he was shot by a disgruntled office seeker named Charles J. Guidow. Garfield was walking through the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad station in Washington, D.C., when Guidow shot him twice. One bullet grazed Garfield's arm, but the other lodged deep in his back. The nation watched in horror as Garfield's health deteriorated. In the days following the shooting, doctors, lacking the knowledge and hygiene practices we take for granted today, probed his wounds with unsterilized fingers and instruments, leading to a fatal infection. Garfield fought for his life for 80 agonizing days, drifting between moments of hope and despair. Finally, on September 19, 1881, he passed away from sepsis at a seaside cottage in New Jersey. He was only 49 years old. The nation mourned deeply, and bells tolled in cities across the country. Garfield's death left a profound impact on the American people. He had represented a new kind of leadership, principled, intellectual, and full of unrealized potential. Many believed he could have brought about the reforms the country so desperately needed. In the aftermath of his death, his tragic passing helped galvanize support for civil service reform, culminating in the Pendleton Act of 1883, which sought to end the corrupt practice of patronage and establish a merit-based system for government appointments. Though Garfield's time in office was brief, his ideals left a lasting impression on American politics. James A. Garfield believed in the power of education, the dignity of work, and the moral obligations of leadership. He rose from humble beginnings to the presidency without ever losing his sense of humility or his thirst for knowledge. His story serves as a reminder that wisdom and compassion, though sometimes silenced early by fate, can echo for generations. And as you close your eyes tonight, picture a man seated at his desk by lantern light, surrounded by books, quietly shaping ideas that could guide a nation, not for applause, but because he believed that leadership begins in the mind and blossoms in the heart. On October 5th, 1829, a boy named Chester Alan Arthur was born, though the precise location of his birth remains shrouded in mystery. Some say it was in Fairfield, Vermont, while others whisper that it might have been in Canada, sparking rumors that would persist for years. His father, William Arthur, was a fiery Irish preacher, and his mother, Malvina, was a woman of remarkable frontier grit. Together, they instilled in young Chester a strong sense of determination and a deep appreciation for culture, education, and personal refinement. Chester grew up in the quiet towns of upstate New York, where he developed a love for fashion, education, and the finer things in life. At Union College, he excelled in the classics, immersing himself in the works of ancient philosophers and honing his rhetorical skills by joining debating societies. His intellectual prowess, combined with his eloquence, marked him as a rising star. After college, Arthur took on the role of a schoolteacher before transitioning into law, practicing in New York City, where he sharpened his keen eye for legal nuance and developed a taste for tailored suits. His polished appearance and poised manner soon caught the attention of those around him, and he was drawn into the world of politics. In the years leading up to the Civil War, Arthur joined the Republican Party, which was gaining strength across the nation. He began to use his legal skills to fight for civil rights, taking on one of the earliest civil rights cases of the era in 1854. Arthur represented Elizabeth Jennings, a black woman who had been forcibly removed from a streetcar. Arthur's victory in the case helped integrate New York's transit system, demonstrating that even in a world driven by party politics, his conscience remained intact. As the years passed, Arthur rose through the ranks, gaining a reputation as a skilled administrator. His organizational skills were recognized, and during the Civil War, President Ulysses S. Grant appointed him as the Quartermaster General of the New York militia. Arthur excelled at logistics, managing supply chains, and ensuring that the army had the resources it needed to fight. He navigated the glittering world of Gilded Age New York, mingling with high society while also participating in the gritty backrooms of Republican politics. Arthur became deeply embedded in the stalwart faction of the Republican Party, loyal to the powerful Senator Roscoe Conkling. The stalwarts were known for their unwavering support of the patronage system, which rewarded political allies with government jobs. In 1871, President Grant appointed Arthur to one of the most influential positions in the country, the Collector of the Port of New York. This position allowed Arthur to oversee customs and duties and quietly amass a small fortune. But in 1878, President Rutherford B. Hayes, pushing for civil service reform, fired Arthur as part of his campaign to curb corruption. Despite this setback, Arthur was not defeated. In 1880, when James A. Garfield secured the Republican nomination, party leaders, seeking to appease the powerful stalwart faction, chose Arthur as his vice presidential candidate. Arthur, largely unknown outside New York, never expected to wield significant power. But just months into Garfield's presidency, an assassin's bullet would change everything. After Garfield's long and agonizing death, Arthur, the man once seen as a loyal party machine politician, found himself suddenly elevated to the highest office in the land on September 19th, 1881. To everyone's surprise, Chester A. Arthur embraced the role of president with dignity and a commitment to reform. He became an advocate for the Pendleton Civil Service Act, a landmark piece of legislation that established merit-based government jobs and reduced the influence of patronage. Under his leadership, the U.S. Navy was modernized, with significant investments in steel ships and the professionalization of naval operations. Arthur's presidency, marked by his restraint, avoided the political extremes that often divided the nation, and he worked tirelessly to guide the country through a period of calm and dignity. Known for his impeccable fashion sense, Arthur earned the nickname the Elegant Arthur. His polished manners and social charm were matched only by the quiet sorrow he carried within. His beloved wife, Ellen Herndon Arthur, had passed away from pneumonia in 1880, just before he assumed the vice presidency. The grief he carried was profound, and he kept a room in the White House in her honor, mourning her loss deeply. Despite his outward charm and elegance, Arthur was a solitary soul who found solace in books, art, and walks beneath the moonlight. As president, Arthur served with a sense of balance, guiding the nation through its political divisions and avoiding the extremes that often defined political discourse. He never sought a second term, his health suffering due to Bright's disease, a severe kidney condition. In 1884, he chose not to run for re-election, retreating to New York City and resuming private life. His health declined rapidly, and on November 18, 1886, at the age of 57, Chester A. Arthur passed away. By then, his legacy had been largely forgotten by a public that never fully understood the depth of his transformation. Chester A. Arthur's legacy is subtle yet profound. He began as a symbol of party politics, a man entrenched in the corrupt system of patronage. But when the nation needed him most, he rose to become a leader of principle, championing reform and restoring public faith in the presidency. His quiet transformation from a party loyalist to a reformer serves as a reminder that greatness can often be found not in changing the world around us, but in changing ourselves. On March 18, 1837, in Caldwell, New Jersey, a boy named Stephen Grover Cleveland entered the world. He was the fifth of 9 children in a family deeply rooted in faith and discipline. His father, a Presbyterian minister, instilled in him a strong sense of honesty, duty, and self-reliance. The Cleveland family moved frequently, but they eventually settled in upstate New York, where young Grover's character began to take shape. Grover's life was marked by hardship from the start. His father passed away when he was young, leaving him to support his family. Grover left school early, taking on a series of jobs, including teaching, working as a store clerk, and later as a law clerk. His determination and long hours of study paid off when he earned his law degree in Buffalo. It was here that he dropped his first name, Stephen, and became known simply as Grover Cleveland. As a lawyer in Buffalo, Cleveland built a reputation for honesty and hard work. Known for his independence, he avoided the political games of his time, yet earned the respect of many for his fair-minded approach. He didn't seek fame, but became a figure admired for his principles. His career took an unexpected turn when he became the sheriff of Erie County. Cleveland personally hanged 2 criminals, a grim yet honest execution of duty that solidified his reputation for unwavering integrity. From there, he rose to become the mayor of Buffalo, where he earned the nickname the Veto Mayor for his refusal to tolerate wasteful spending. Cleveland's next step was to become the governor of New York. He fought corruption in the state and clashed with the powerful political machines of Tammany Hall. His approach was simple. A public office is a public trust. It was a philosophy that guided him throughout his life and political career, emphasizing the importance of honesty, accountability, and a deep sense of responsibility. In 1884, the Democratic Party nominated Cleveland for president. His Republican opponent, James G. Blaine, was embroiled in scandal, and Cleveland's reputation for honesty helped him win over reform-minded voters, many of whom crossed party lines to support him. The campaign, however, was brutal, with personal attacks on Cleveland's character, including a scandal about an illegitimate child. Unlike many politicians of his time, Cleveland took responsibility, acknowledging the truth and accepting the consequences. His honesty during the scandal only added to his reputation, and in November of 1884, he won the election, becoming the 22nd President of the United States, the first Democrat to be elected since the Civil War. Cleveland governed with a strict sense of duty, firmly believing that the president's role was not to give in to political pressure, but to act according to the needs of the country. He vetoed hundreds of bills, especially those involving pension frauds and special interest giveaways, which he saw as wasteful government spending. He opposed unnecessary government intervention, including a controversial decision to reject a bill that would provide seeds to drought-stricken farmers, arguing that it was not the government's responsibility to intervene in such matters. Though he wasn't a charismatic speaker, Cleveland was seen as a rock of integrity in a political landscape marred by excess and corruption. In 1886, at the age of 49, he married Frances Folsom, the youngest First Lady in U.S. history, who was 27 years younger than him. Their White House wedding charmed the nation, bringing a sense of optimism to his presidency. However, Cleveland's second term was filled with challenges. In 1888, he lost his re-election bid to Benjamin Harrison, despite winning the popular vote. Cleveland quietly returned to private life in New York, but remained a powerful voice in the Democratic Party. In 1892, he ran for president again and won. making him the only U.S. president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms, becoming the 24th president. His second presidency was marked by an economic crisis, the Panic of 1893, which triggered a deep depression. Cleveland supported the gold standard, which caused him to clash with pro-silver Democrats. He also faced labor unrest, particularly the Pullman strike, where he ordered federal troops to break the strike, a decision that sparked controversy, but which he believed was necessary to maintain order. Despite the political cost, Cleveland refused to bow to popular pressure and remained firm in his belief in sound fiscal policy and the integrity of the presidency. During his second term, Cleveland also underwent a secret surgery aboard a yacht to remove a cancerous tumor from his mouth, a procedure kept hidden from the public to avoid panic and preserve the stability of his presidency. After leaving office in 1897, Cleveland retired to Princeton, New Jersey, where he continued to be active in education, speaking engagements, and writing. He served on the Board of Trustees at Princeton University and remained an advocate for nonpartisan government and civic virtue. On June 24, 1908, Grover Cleveland passed away at the age of 71. His legacy is one of steadfast principle over political expediency. Cleveland believed that government must be limited, accountable, and honest. He vetoed more bills than any president before him, not to obstruct progress, but to preserve the public trust. His presidency, marked by economic struggles and political turbulence, was defined by his courage to do what was right, even when it was politically unpopular. Future generations would come to admire Cleveland not for his charisma, but for his unshakable character. He proved that true leadership is not about changing the world around you, but about maintaining integrity, even when facing the fiercest storms. Grover Cleveland believed that character was the true test of leadership, and like the oak in a storm, he did not bend. On a cold winter's day, August 20th, 1833, a boy named Benjamin Harrison was born in North Bend, Ohio. He was born into a family already woven into the fabric of American history. His grandfather, William Henry Harrison, had served as the 9th President of the United States, and his great-grandfather, Benjamin Harrison Ainer, had been a signer of the Declaration of Independence. Despite this powerful legacy, young Benjamin grew up in an atmosphere of quiet humility. His father, John Scott Harrison, was a respected congressman, but their lifestyle was modest, and they lived with the values of faith, learning, and patriotism. As a child in the rolling fields of Ohio, Harrison learned the importance of hard work, duty, and service. He attended Miami University in Ohio, where he developed a love for oratory and a deepened sense of faith. After graduating, he studied law, moved to Indianapolis, Indiana, and began practicing law, opening a new chapter in his life. The outbreak of the Civil War changed the course of his future when Harrison, filled with a sense of duty, joined the Union Army. He rose to the rank of brigadier general, earning the respect of his men for his calm demeanor, composure, and courage under fire. Harrison never sought the spotlight, but was recognized for his quiet leadership on the battlefield. Once the war ended, Harrison returned to Indianapolis to resume his law career, but his journey into politics was only just beginning. He entered public service and became a U.S. Senator from Indiana. Known for his brilliant legal mind, Harrison became a staunch advocate for civil rights, particularly for African Americans in the South. He was not a flamboyant figure in politics, but he was solid, dependable, and principled. He didn't crave attention, but he earned the respect and admiration of his peers for his integrity and dedication to justice. In 1888, the Republican Party nominated Harrison to challenge the incumbent president, Grover Cleveland. Although Cleveland won the popular vote, Harrison triumphed in the Electoral College and became the 23rd President of the United States. His campaign had garnered support from wealthy industrialists, which influenced public perception of his presidency. But Harrison was steadfast in his belief in protecting American industry, strengthening the nation, and honoring the Union. He began his term with a quiet confidence and a clear sense of duty. Harrison's administration was marked by several significant achievements. He signed the McKinley Tariff, which raised duties on imported goods to protect American manufacturing. This was particularly popular in the North, but controversial in the South and West. He also supported the Sherman Antitrust Act, the first major law aimed at limiting monopolies and curbing corporate abuse. Harrison advocated for civil rights, including federal education funding and voting protections for African Americans, although these bills were ultimately blocked by the Senate. During his presidency, 6 new states were admitted to the Union: North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Washington, Idaho, and Wyoming. He also modernized the U.S. Navy, strengthening America's maritime power. Harrison wasn't a man of grand speeches or theatrical gestures. He was more comfortable in his study, reading scripture, or sharing quiet moments with his beloved wife, Caroline, and their children. Caroline was an accomplished First Lady, supporting the arts, working on the historic preservation of the White House, and helping establish the Daughters of the American Revolution. However, during Harrison's presidency, Caroline fell gravely ill. Her death in 1892, just weeks before the election, devastated him. The loss left him heartbroken, and his grief was felt deeply by those around him. In the 1892 election, Grover Cleveland returned to reclaim the presidency, defeating Harrison. Harrison's support for high tariffs and business interests had alienated some voters, particularly during a time of rising populist sentiment. After leaving office, Harrison returned to Indianapolis, where he resumed his law practice and gave lectures across the country. He remarried in 1896 to Mary Dimmock, his late wife's niece and former aide, which stirred some controversy. Nevertheless, Harrison remained active in public affairs, arguing before the Supreme Court, writing on constitutional issues, and supporting international peace efforts. Benjamin Harrison passed away on March 13, 1901, at the age of 67. Though he may not have been a fiery figure in history, those who knew him remembered him as a man of character, discipline, and integrity. His presidency was one of quiet but consequential action. Harrison worked to strengthen the economy, expanded the Union, and laid the groundwork for future reforms. His belief in the rule of law, protecting the dignity of every citizen, and supporting a fair and just government marked his leadership. He wasn't loud or attention-seeking, but his voice was measured, thoughtful, and rooted in conviction. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, imagine a man standing at his desk, writing by lamplight, his spectacles balanced on the bridge of his nose. He isn't seeking applause. He is seeking truth. Benjamin Harrison believed that true leadership is quiet, humble, and grounded in purpose. A steady hand guiding the ship of state through uncertain waters. On January 29, 1843, in the modest town of Niles, Ohio, a boy named William McKinley Jr. was born. He was the seventh of 9 children in a hard-working family. His father, William McKinley, Sr., and his mother, Nancy Allison McKinley, both valued education, thrift, and faith. They taught young William the importance of hard work, humility, and dedication to family. Despite the prominence of his family history, with his grandfather, William Henry Harrison, serving as the 9th president and his great-grandfather being Benjamin Harrison Ainer, a signer of the Declaration of Independence. William grew up in modest surroundings, grounded in simplicity and moral values. As a young boy, McKinley was polite, thoughtful, and intelligent. He attended Allegheny College for a brief time, but his education was interrupted by illness and the family's financial struggles. However, McKinley's thirst for knowledge didn't fade. He continued to study on his own, eventually becoming a schoolteacher. It was during this time that McKinley's character and resilience began to take shape, traits that would serve him well in the years ahead. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, McKinley, at just 18 years old, enlisted in the 23rd Ohio Infantry. Serving under future President Rutherford B. Hayes, McKinley rose from private to brevet major, earning the respect of his fellow soldiers. At the Battle of Antietam, while under heavy fire, McKinley delivered food and coffee to the soldiers, an act of selflessness that became a symbol of his bravery and composure under fire. After the war, McKinley studied law, passed the bar, and settled in Canton, Ohio, where he began his political career. He served in the U.S. House of Representatives for 14 years, gaining recognition for his expertise on tariff policy. McKinley championed protectionism, believing that raising import duties would benefit American industries and help the nation recover from economic hardship. His most significant legislative achievement was the McKinley Tariff of 1890, which raised duties on imported goods. While the tariff succeeded in protecting U.S. manufacturing, it also raised consumer prices, causing political backlash, especially in the South. Nonetheless, McKinley's quiet charisma, methodical thinking, and steady leadership made him a respected figure within the Republican Party. In 1891, McKinley was elected governor of Ohio, where he served 2 terms. As governor, he focused on industrial growth, fair labor laws, and moderate reforms, maintaining a balanced approach to progress. His careful attention to the needs of his constituents and his commitment to the state's prosperity earned him a reputation as a calm, reliable leader. In 1896, during a period of economic hardship, McKinley was nominated by the Republican Party for president. His opponent, William Jennings Bryan, campaigned with fiery populist speeches, crisscrossing the nation with promises of economic change. McKinley, in contrast, remained in Canton, delivering speeches from his front porch to thousands of visiting delegations. This approach conveyed a sense of calm and confidence, appealing to those who sought stability in uncertain times. His campaign, masterfully managed by political strategist Mark Hanna, raised substantial funds and ensured that McKinley's message reached every corner of the country. McKinley's promise of sound money, backing currency with gold, and economic revival resonated with voters, leading him to victory in a landslide. McKinley's first term as president was marked by prosperity and power. He signed the Gold Standard Act, which stabilized the economy and established the gold standard as the basis for the nation's currency. He also passed high tariffs to protect American industries. McKinley's leadership during the Spanish-American War of 1898, sparked by the explosion of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor, elevated his standing both domestically and internationally. The war lasted only a few months, but its consequences were monumental. The U.S. acquired Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, while Cuba became independent. McKinley's careful and deliberate handling of the war earned widespread praise. His leadership during this time symbolized America's emergence as a global power, as the country began to assert itself on the world stage. In 1899, McKinley ran for re-election with a bold and energetic running mate, Theodore Roosevelt. His second campaign echoed the themes of prosperity, expansion, and stability. McKinley won easily, securing a second term in office. However, just months into his second term, tragedy struck. On September 6, 1901, while greeting visitors at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York, McKinley was shot twice by Leon C. Zalgas, an anarchist opposed to government and authority. Doctors immediately operated, but complications set in, and on September 14th, McKinley succumbed to his wounds. His last words were, "It is God's way, His will, not ours, be done." The nation was stunned. Cities across the country held candlelight vigils, and crowds wept openly for the loss of a president who had come to symbolize quiet stability and progress. McKinley was buried in Canton, Ohio, where a magnificent memorial stands in his honor. His presidency marked the end of the old era and the beginning of the modern American century. He led the country into global prominence, presided over economic recovery, and laid the groundwork for America's imperial influence. While McKinley was sometimes overshadowed by his successor, Theodore Roosevelt, he is remembered for his firm and steady leadership, kindness, and devotion to duty. McKinley believed that strength lies in composure, that unity is forged in peace, and that leadership can wear a quiet but firm expression. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, picture a man in a crisp black suit, standing on a quiet front porch, hands clasped together, speaking gently to a hopeful crowd below. He is calm, not loud, because William McKinley believed that true leadership comes from strength in composure and purpose. A steady hand guiding the ship of state through uncertain times. On October 27, 1858, Theodore Roosevelt Jr. was born in a handsome brownstone in New York City. Though born into privilege, his early years were marked by frailty. As a baby, he suffered from severe asthma, a condition that made him weak and often left him gasping for breath. His wealthy father, Theodore R, believed that true strength could only be built through effort and challenge. He took young Teddy on brisk walks, carriage rides, and even had him breathe steam to ease his attacks. His mother, Martha Bullock Roosevelt, a Southern belle, filled the home with warmth, charm, and tradition. Despite the wealth around him, it was a house where strength and resilience were prized above all. Rather than succumbing to his physical limitations, Roosevelt declared war on them. He embraced what he would later call the strenuous life, a philosophy rooted in pushing both the body and the mind to their limits. He strengthened his lungs and spirit through exercise, hunting trips, and rigorous outdoor activities, transforming his childhood weakness into the strength of a warrior. Roosevelt's determination to conquer his body's limitations mirrored the fierceness of his mind. A voracious reader, he consumed books on history, science, politics, and nature, developing a keen intellect that would serve him throughout his life. His education at Harvard University, where he graduated in 1880, cemented his reputation for brilliance, eccentricity, and boundless energy. In the same year, Roosevelt married Alice Hathaway Lee, his first great love. He quickly entered politics, becoming a member of the New York State Assembly at the age of 23. But in 1884, tragedy struck. In one devastating day, both his mother and his wife died. Stricken with grief, Roosevelt wrote a large X across the page of his diary and wrote, "The light has gone out of my life." Consumed by sorrow, he withdrew from politics and retreated to the Badlands of North Dakota. There, amid wild horses, barren landscapes, and the bitter winds of the frontier, Roosevelt sought solace. He lived as a cowboy, rancher, and self-proclaimed frontier philosopher, allowing the West to heal him. It was in these vast, open spaces that he transformed his grief into resolve and reconnected with his sense of purpose. Roosevelt eventually returned to New York, and with renewed energy, he resumed his public service. He remarried in 1894 to Edith Kermit Caro, a childhood friend, and together they raised 6 children in a home filled with books, laughter, and pets. Roosevelt's second marriage grounded him and gave him a family life that balanced his intense public career. As the U.S. Civil Service Commissioner, he fought corruption as president of the New York City Police Board. He reformed a scandal-plagued force, and as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, he modernized America's fleet. But when war with Spain broke out in 1898, Roosevelt's hunger for action couldn't be contained. He resigned from his post, formed the Rough Riders, and led a heroic charge up San Juan Hill in Cuba. His bravery in battle made him a national hero, and by 1899 he was elected governor of New York, where he pushed forward progressive reforms that frustrated the party bosses. In 1899, the Republican Party, eager to get rid of Roosevelt's reformist energy, nominated him as vice president under William McKinley. They thought he would fade into political obscurity. They miscalculated. When McKinley was assassinated in 1901, Roosevelt, at the age of 42, became the youngest president in U.S. history. The country's new leader brought a fresh vitality to the presidency, quickly becoming known for his dynamic leadership and relentless pursuit of reform. Roosevelt's vision was rooted in his belief in the square deal, promising fairness to labor, business, and consumers alike. He fought monopolies with the Sherman Antitrust Act, championed railroad regulation, supported pure food and drug laws, and fought for worker protections. His focus was not just on economic reform, but also on environmental conservation. Roosevelt's love for the natural world was as deep as his passion for justice. He protected over 230 million acres of public land, establishing 5 national parks, 18 national monuments, and 150 national forests. His work with the famed naturalist John Muir to camp in Yosemite and dream up conservation ideas marked a turning point in the country's approach to nature. Roosevelt was the first president to see the presidency as a bully pulpit, a platform from which to rally the people to noble causes. His foreign policy reflected his assertive personality. He famously said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." And during his presidency, he expanded America's global influence. He brokered peace in the Russo-Japanese War, earning the Nobel Peace Prize, and oversaw the construction of the Panama Canal, connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Roosevelt's aggressive diplomacy and decisive action elevated America to global prominence. He also asserted U.S. power in the Western Hemisphere through the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Though known for his brashness, Roosevelt always sought to balance power with principle, never afraid to take on the establishment for what he believed was right. He did not seek a third term in 1908, instead supporting his friend and successor, William Howard Taft. But when Taft's presidency disappointed him, particularly in his retreat from reform, Roosevelt returned in 1912 to run for president again, this time as the candidate for the Progressive Party, also known as the Bull Moose Party. During his campaign, Roosevelt was shot in the chest by an assassin while giving a speech. Undeterred, he insisted on finishing his address before seeking medical help. "It takes more than that to kill a bull moose," he famously said. Although he lost the election to Woodrow Wilson, Roosevelt's impact on American politics was undeniable. He had reinvigorated the nation's spirit and the reform movement. In 1913, Roosevelt embarked on an expedition to the Amazon, a journey that nearly cost him his life. He contracted a tropical infection lost 60 pounds, and never fully recovered. However, his spirit remained unbroken. In his later years, he continued to write, speak, and advocate for American preparedness during World War I. His health continued to decline, but his tenacity never wavered. On January 6, 1919, Roosevelt died in his sleep at the age of 60. Vice President Thomas Marshall remarked, "Death had to take him sleeping, for if Roosevelt had been awake, there would have been a fight." Theodore Roosevelt remains one of the most dynamic, complex, and beloved figures in American history. He redefined the presidency, transforming it into an active force for justice, reform, and moral leadership. Though at times aggressive and imperialistic, Roosevelt never stopped fighting for what he believed was right. He proved that power could be wielded with purpose. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, picture a man bounding across the White House lawn, children chasing behind him, books under one arm, and a parrot squawking on his shoulder. He pauses to wrestle with a visiting diplomat before bounding off again, laughing, shouting, dreaming. Because Theodore Roosevelt believed that life must be lived boldly, that justice must be pursued fiercely, and that even a mustache can change the world. On September 15, 1857, a healthy baby boy named William Howard Taft was born in Cincinnati, Ohio. He was the seventh of 9 children, raised in a family well established in law and politics. His father, Alonzo Taft, had served as Attorney General and Secretary of War under President Ulysses S. Grant. Despite the family's prominence, young William was raised with a strong sense of duty, intellectual rigor, and the importance of public service. He was a boy with a large frame, built like a sturdy oak tree, and had a keen mind for both study and physical activity. From a young age, Taft excelled in school, developing a particular passion for wrestling, where he was nearly unbeatable. His academic success led him to Yale University, where he graduated second in his class. At Yale, Taft's intellectual capacity was evident, but so was his sense of humor and affability. While at Yale, he developed a strong sense of fairness, a characteristic that would guide his future career. He then followed his father's footsteps and studied law. But Taft was never a man whose ambition was driven by presidential dreams. His true love was the judiciary, the quiet power of the law, the intellectual thrill of fair argument, and the pursuit of justice. Taft rose steadily through the legal world, gaining a reputation for his careful reasoning and fairness. He served as a judge in Ohio, became the Solicitor General of the United States, and argued cases before the Supreme Court. In 1898, President Theodore Roosevelt, a close friend and admirer, tapped Taft to lead the Philippine Commission. Taft's calm and steady leadership in the Philippines earned him admiration for his even-handed administration and reformist ideals. His success in the Philippines led Roosevelt to bring him back to Washington as Secretary of War, grooming him as his political heir. Roosevelt saw in Taft a man of integrity, intellect, and gentleness, qualities that Roosevelt believed would carry forward his progressive reforms. In 1898, with Roosevelt's full backing, Taft was elected as the 27th President of the United States. Taft was a man of methodical temperament, whose loyalty to the Constitution and the law defined his presidency. Though he was a man of deep intellectual curiosity, politics never came as naturally to him as it had to Roosevelt. Taft was not a dynamic, attention-grabbing leader like Roosevelt, and his quieter approach to governance soon became a source of tension between the two men. During his presidency, Taft pursued a strong legal agenda. He prosecuted more antitrust cases than Roosevelt, including significant cases against U.S. Steel and Standard Oil, marking a significant expansion of Roosevelt's trust-busting efforts. Taft also supported tariff reform, a politically costly stance that put him at odds with some factions of his party. He championed the 16th Amendment, which authorized a federal income tax and pushed forward civil service reforms. However, his more cautious, legalistic approach to governance alienated some progressives who yearned for bolder action. This difference in style led to a rift between Taft and Roosevelt, and their once close friendship soured. In 1912, Roosevelt ran for president again, forming the Bull Moose Party after becoming disillusioned with Taft's presidency. The Republican vote was split, and Woodrow Wilson won the election. Taft, ever dignified, took the loss with grace. After his defeat, he returned to Yale, where he taught law and reflected on the political bruises he had endured. Although his presidency was often overshadowed by Roosevelt's larger-than-life persona, Taft's legal mind and devotion to the Constitution never wavered. He had always seen the law as his true calling, and in 1921, President Warren G. Harding appointed him as Chief Justice of the United States, a role Taft had longed for. As Chief Justice, Taft found the fulfillment he had always sought. He modernized the federal judiciary, advocated for the construction of the Supreme Court building, and presided over landmark cases with grace and dignity. His leadership of the court solidified his legacy as a man of substance in a time of spectacle. Taft became the only person in U.S. history to have served as both President and Chief Justice, leaving a lasting impact on American law and governance. He served as Chief Justice until just weeks before his death, enjoying the work he loved. William Howard Taft passed away on March 8, 1930, at the age of 72. He was buried in Arlington National Cemetery, becoming the first U.S. president to be laid to rest there. His legacy is not marked by the flashy speeches and grand gestures of other leaders, but rather by his deep commitment to legal excellence, measured reform, and the service of his country. He was a thinker in an age of shouters, a man whose greatness lay not in his loudness, but in his quiet dedication to justice. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, picture a large man seated at a wide desk, spectacles perched on the tip of his nose, a soft smile on his face as he reads the Constitution by lamplight. Because William Howard Taft believed that true greatness doesn't shout. It reasons, it listens, and it lasts. In the heart of a small town called Stanton, Virginia, on a gray winter day, December 28, 1856, a boy was born into a home where the Word of God wasn't just preached, it was lived. His name was Thomas Woodrow Wilson. To those close to him, he was simply Tommy, a quiet, thoughtful child with eyes that seemed to look deeper, searching for meaning in every word, every glance, every gesture. His childhood unfolded during one of America's darkest hours. The Civil War loomed large. The sound of Confederate cannons echoed through the streets, sermons thundered from pulpits, and fear mixed with faith in every household. Young Tommy soaked it all in: conflict and conviction, sorrow and resolve. Early on, learning didn't come easily. He started reading later than other children, likely due to dyslexia. But where others might have struggled and given up, Tommy found a different path through language. The rhythm of speech, the power of ideas, and the magic of words became his passion. Books were his companions. Thinking, speaking, and writing would become his strength. He pursued education with relentless drive. He studied at Princeton University, earned a law degree from the University of Virginia, and later a Ph.D. in political science from Johns Hopkins University. To this day, Woodrow Wilson remains the only U.S. president to hold a doctoral degree. His academic journey led him to the classroom and eventually to the presidency of Princeton University. There, he clashed with entrenched alumni as he reformed the curriculum, striving to make education more accessible and meaningful. The fights made him stronger, sharpening both his intellect and his resolve. Political leaders in New Jersey took notice. In 1910, the Democratic Party nominated him for governor, hoping to use his clean image as a counter to party corruption. Many thought he'd be a figurehead. Instead, he shocked them, cleaning house, confronting the political machine, and showing that principle and power could walk hand in hand. Just 2 years later, in 1912, Wilson became the Democratic nominee for president. His campaign promised a new freedom, a return of government to the people, and a break from monopolistic control. He won the election, aided by a split in the Republican vote between William Howard Taft and Theodore Roosevelt. And so, Woodrow Wilson became the 28th President of the United States. His first term was a whirlwind of reform. The Federal Reserve System was established, still the backbone of America's economy. He signed the Federal Trade Commission into law to tackle monopolies, and the Clayton Antitrust Act to strengthen antitrust enforcement. He supported the 16th Amendment, introducing the federal income tax, and the 17th, allowing for direct election of senators. The Underwood Tariff lowered duties and created a graduated income tax. It was a time of bold progress. Yet his presidency was not without flaws. On matters of race, Wilson's administration took a shameful step backward by segregating federal offices, a decision that stained his record deeply. When war erupted in Europe in 1914, Wilson pleaded for neutrality. He asked Americans to remain impartial in thought as well as in action. But neutrality was a fragile stance. German U-boats sank civilian ships. Then came the Zimmermann telegram, Germany offering Mexico an alliance against the U.S. in 1917. Wilson asked Congress for a declaration of war, stating America must make the world safe for democracy. The nation mobilized. A massive draft began. Industry retooled for war. Propaganda campaigns swept the land. Civil liberties were tested. Wilson signed the Espionage and Sedition Acts, restricting speech in the name of national security. The war ended in 1918, and Wilson emerged as a global statesman, a voice for peace. He became the first sitting U.S. president to travel to Europe, attending the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. There, he unveiled his vision, his 14 points: open diplomacy, freedom of the seas, self-determination for nations. At its heart was a bold idea: the League of Nations, an international body to prevent future wars. But the Treaty of Versailles, shaped by politics and revenge, punished Germany harshly. Wilson, desperate to save the League, accepted the compromise. Back home, the U.S. Senate, led by Henry Cabot Lodge, refused to ratify the treaty. America would never join the League. For Wilson, it was a crushing defeat. Still, he didn't give up. He set out on a cross-country tour to rally public support. The journey proved too much. In the fall of 1919, he suffered a massive stroke. He was left partly paralyzed and blind in one eye. For months, the truth was hidden. Behind closed doors, his wife Edith Wilson quietly took charge of the executive branch. One of the most remarkable and mysterious chapters in presidential history. In 1920, Wilson was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, though illness prevented him from celebrating. He completed his term in 1921 and retired to a modest home in Washington, D.C. on February 3, 1924. He passed away. Woodrow Wilson's legacy is tangled and profound. He reshaped the presidency, expanded the power of the federal government, and led the nation through a global war. He laid the foundations for international cooperation, seeds that would later bloom into the United Nations. He championed economic progress, but failed deeply on racial justice. He was a paradox, idealistic and stubborn, visionary and blind, brilliant yet bound by the limitations of his era. Imagine him now tall, lean, seated in a high-backed chair, pen in hand, glasses low on his nose, surrounded by maps, treaties, and unanswered letters. His voice never shouted, but it carried weight. Because Woodrow Wilson believed that ideas could shape nations, and that peace, no matter how fragile, was worth fighting for, especially with words. On a quiet November morning in the year 1865, in the sleepy village of Blooming Grove, Ohio, a baby boy was born. His name was Warren Gamaliel Harding. His father was a country doctor and his mother a midwife. They raised their children among the rolling hills and gentle farmland of rural America. A world of cornfields, porch swings, and dusty roads. Warren was no genius, but he had a gift that would serve him all his life: warmth. He was charming, approachable, and had a voice like velvet, a rich baritone that people trusted. He loved music, belonged to a brass band, and had a knack for bringing people together. He attended Ohio Central College, where he studied a little of everything but didn't quite stand out. After graduation, he drifted into journalism and bought a failing newspaper in the small town of Marion, Ohio. With patience and charisma, he turned the Marion Daily Star into a success. The paper's survival was no miracle. It was Harding's ability to connect with the community, to reflect their hopes and worries in print. Around this time, he met Florence Cling de Wolfe, a fierce, intelligent woman, older than Warren and with a mind for business. She believed in him even when he didn't. Florence took over the books, managed the business, and soon began managing Warren's political image too. Their marriage was complex but strong. She once said she had to make a man out of him, and in many ways she did. Harding's presence was magnetic. His easy smile, calm voice, and dignified bearing made him a natural in public life. He entered politics, serving in the Ohio State Senate, then as lieutenant governor. In 1914, he was elected to the United States Senate. Harding was no firebrand. He didn't offer radical ideas or thunderous speeches. He preferred calm to confrontation, compromise over conflict. At a time when the country was tired from World War I, tired of President Wilson's high-minded but exhausting idealism, Harding's gentleness was a relief. By the year 1920, the Republican Party was in need of a safe candidate, someone who wouldn't divide the country. Their first choices faltered, unable to win support. And so, almost unexpectedly, Warren G. Harding emerged as the answer. He was agreeable, polished, and carried no baggage. His campaign slogan, "Return to Normalcy," captured the mood of the nation. Americans wanted peace. They wanted rest. That year's election was historic. It was the first time women could vote in every state, and Harding's warmth appealed to them, too. He won the presidency in a landslide, defeating Democrat James M. Cox. The early 1920s were roaring with energy. Jazz clubs were blooming, radios crackling with music, and Model Ts humming down Main Street. The war was over, and people wanted to live again. Harding, true to form, kept his promises simple: support business, cut taxes, and make government more efficient. He created the Bureau of the Budget to bring order to federal spending. He signed the Emergency Quota Act, limiting immigration, a decision reflecting the fears and prejudices of the time. He appointed capable men to key positions: Charles Evans Hughes at State, Andrew Mellon at Treasury, Herbert Hoover at Commerce. These men were brilliant, hardworking, and respected. But Harding also made appointments based on loyalty rather than integrity. He brought along a group of friends and allies from Ohio, known to history as the Ohio Gang. Some were decent. Others were deeply corrupt. Harding, always trusting and loyal, saw the best in people. It was both his strength and his tragic flaw. He loved poker, storytelling, and good company. But he also had a blind spot, especially for friends who used their positions to enrich themselves. Scandals would eventually emerge. The most infamous was the Teapot Dome scandal, where federal oil reserves were secretly leased in exchange for bribes. The Veterans Bureau saw fraud and waste. Even the Justice Department was tainted. There is no evidence that Harding profited from any of it, but he appointed the men who did, and he defended them longer than he should have. He once confided to a journalist, "I can deal with my enemies all right, but my friends, my goddamned friends, they're the ones that keep me walking the floor nights." By 1923, the pressure was taking its toll. Wanting to reconnect with the people, Harding launched what he called the Voyage of Understanding, a cross-country train tour to see America and let America see him. But his health was failing. On August 2nd, in the city of San Francisco, he collapsed and died suddenly. He was only 57 years old. The nation was stunned. People wept. They remembered a kind, gentle leader who had given them peace. For a time, Harding was mourned as a father figure, steady, friendly, and human. But then the scandals broke. One by one, newspapers uncovered the rot beneath his administration, and the image of Harding began to fall. Historians for decades ranked him among the worst presidents in American history, not for evil deeds, but for allowing others to do them in his name. Yet more recently, a reevaluation has begun. Harding was the first president to openly support civil rights for African Americans. He spoke for equal education and political participation, rare and courageous words in that era. He pardoned Eugene Debs, the socialist leader imprisoned by Wilson for speaking against the war. He believed in mercy. He also convened the Washington Naval Conference, an international agreement to limit warships and promote peace. It was a groundbreaking step in diplomacy. Harding's legacy is not simple. He was a man of empathy, not control, a leader who meant well but misjudged people deeply. He craved harmony, but in trusting too easily, he invited chaos. And yet, perhaps that's what makes him so human. As you close your eyes and drift into dreams, picture a quiet room in the White House. A soft lamp glows, cards shuffle at a table. A gentle voice laughs, rich, warm, and a little weary. Warren G. Harding sits back, cigar in hand, watching the smoke curl into the air. He wasn't perfect, but he believed that healing mattered more than headlines. And though his shadows were many, his smile, even now, somehow reaches through them. In the green hills of Vermont, beneath skies filled with stillness and shimmering stars, on the 4th of July, 1872, a baby boy was born. His name was John Calvin Coolidge, Jr., though history would come to know him simply as Cal, the man of few words but fierce convictions. Calvin grew up in the small town of Plymouth Notch, where his father wore many hats, a hardworking storekeeper, a constable, and a justice of the peace. When Calvin was just 12, his mother passed away. Her absence was like a whisper through the trees, a quiet sorrow that shaped his solemn soul and wrapped him in a deep and graceful sadness. From an early age, Calvin was not loud or flashy. He did not charm rooms or roar with laughter. Instead, he was steady and thoughtful, a man who listened more than he spoke and measured every word as if it were precious gold. At Amherst College, he blossomed intellectually, studying philosophy, politics, and literature. Afterward, he studied law and entered politics through the most traditional of paths: small-town service, dedication, and sheer reliability. Calvin rose quietly but steadily, from city councilman to mayor, then state senator, lieutenant governor, and finally governor of Massachusetts. It was during his governorship that the nation took notice of him. In 1919, the Boston police force went on strike, and chaos swept the city. Calm and unshaken, Coolidge called in the National Guard and refused to reinstate the striking officers. "There is no right to strike against the public safety by anybody, anywhere, anytime," he declared firmly. This statement became a national motto. And just like that, the quiet man from Vermont was thrust into the national spotlight. In 1920, the Republican Party chose him as vice president under Warren G. Harding. Fate intervened on August 2, 1923, when President Harding died suddenly during a trip to the West. Coolidge, visiting his family home in Vermont, was awakened in the middle of the night by a messenger. In that humble farmhouse, lit only by a single kerosene lamp, his father, a notary public, administered the presidential oath of office in their sitting room. No grandeur, no headlines, just a father, a son, and a moment that changed history. Coolidge now found himself president of a nation still healing from World War I, and rushing headfirst into the Roaring Twenties. From 1923 to 1929, he presided over one of the most economically prosperous periods in American history. He believed in limited government, low taxes, and staying out of people's way. His mantra was simple: the business of America is business. He reduced the national debt, cut government spending, and oversaw a booming stock market. Unemployment dropped, industry soared, and he resisted the temptation to interfere too much in the whirlwind growth of the time. Coolidge did not seek the spotlight or crave approval. He held press conferences, but often gave reporters little more than a nod or a blink. Yet behind that cool exterior was a man who read poetry, adored animals, especially his beloved white collie, Rob Roy, and mourned privately when his teenage son, Calvin Jr., died suddenly in 1924. That tragedy nearly crushed him, but he carried on with quiet courage. He had a dry, subtle sense of humor. Once, at a dinner party, a woman said she had bet she could get more than 2 words out of him. His reply, "You lose." His wife, Grace Coolidge, was his opposite, vivacious, warm, and utterly devoted. She softened his silence and brought light to the White House. Together, they balanced restraint with charm. In 1928, Coolidge stunned the nation by choosing not to run for re-election. "I do not choose to run for president in 1928, he said simply, and that was that. He returned to private life, gave speeches, wrote his memoirs, and stayed out of the headlines. He died in 1933, just before the Great Depression swallowed the country he had helped shepherd through years of economic boom. His legacy remains debated. Some see him as a hands-off president who missed warning signs. Others admire his humility, discipline, and respect for constitutional limits. What is certain is that Calvin Coolidge governed with an inner strength that needed no microphone. He was a man of silence in an age of noise, a calm lighthouse during stormy growth, a figure who taught us that sometimes doing less means doing exactly enough. So, in the gentle stillness of this bedtime story, we leave Silent Cal under the Vermont stars, his legacy echoing in every deliberate pause, every thoughtful decision, and every dream of quieter, steadier days. In the windswept fields of Iowa, beneath endless skies that seem to stretch forever, a small boy with kind eyes and a quiet spirit was born on August 10th, 1874. His name was Herbert Clark Hoover, and although the world would later remember him as the president who faced the Great Depression, his story began with a deep silence, the silence of loss. Both of Herbert's parents passed away before he turned 10, leaving him orphaned and adrift. Sent westward to live with an uncle in Oregon, he found himself surrounded by misty forests and the stoic calm of the Pacific Northwest. It was here, among towering trees and rushing rivers, that young Herbert learned the value of hard work, humility, and perseverance. Herbert was not a boy of many words, but when he spoke, his voice carried meaning. He was not born into privilege, yet he carved his own path with raw determination. In 1891, he became a member of the very first class at Stanford University, where he studied geology. Money was tight, and Herbert worked tirelessly, stoking furnaces, doing laundry, and even managing the football team to pay for his education. Grit and resolve were his second nature. After graduation, Herbert Hoover became a mining engineer, traveling the world from Australia to China and beyond. He managed mining operations with skill and fairness, a rare quality in an era when workers were often exploited. His reputation for technical brilliance was matched by his compassion for those who labored alongside him. As his wealth grew, so did his heart. When World War I erupted, Hoover transformed from a wealthy engineer into a global humanitarian. In 1914, he organized aid for Americans stranded in Europe, showing early signs of his boundless compassion. That same year, he launched the Commission for Relief in Belgium, delivering food to millions trapped behind enemy lines. This was the largest humanitarian effort the world had ever seen. One Belgian child called him the man who fed us when no one else would. By the end of the war, Hoover's relief efforts extended beyond Belgium to Poland, Austria, Armenia, and many others. His remarkable work caught the attention of President Woodrow Wilson, who appointed Hoover as the U.S. Food Administrator. Hoover encouraged Americans to Hooverize by conserving food, and they did so willingly because they trusted him deeply. Despite his immense popularity, Hoover had little desire to be a politician. Yet the country wanted him. After serving as Secretary of Commerce under Presidents Harding and Coolidge, Hoover reluctantly accepted the Republican nomination for president in 1928, running on a platform of prosperity and efficiency. He won by a landslide, but just months into his presidency, the world shifted beneath his feet. In October 1929, the stock market crashed. Banks failed, jobs vanished, and families lost everything. What began as an economic slump quickly spiraled into the Great Depression, the worst crisis in American history. Herbert Hoover, the brilliant organizer who had once rescued Europe from hunger, now faced disaster at home. He tried to help, creating public works programs, encouraging business cooperation, and forming relief loans. But he deeply believed in limited government and voluntary action, not direct federal aid. To a nation desperate for food and jobs, his restraint often felt like indifference. Prosperity is just around the corner, he insisted, but that corner never came. Shantytowns sprang up across the country, mockingly dubbed Hoovervilles. The once great humanitarian found himself vilified, seen as a man out of step with the desperate mood of the nation. Yet Hoover was not heartless. Haunted and overwhelmed, he worked tirelessly behind the scenes. He refused to take a presidential salary and donated large portions of his fortune to relief efforts. Still, the public demanded immediate, visible help. And in that demand, Hoover's philosophical restraint became his political undoing. In 1932, he lost re-election in a landslide to Franklin D. Roosevelt. Exhausted, defeated, and deeply misunderstood, Hoover left office. But his story did not end there. He lived for another 31 years, becoming one of the longest-lived former presidents in American history. During that time, he quietly rebuilt his reputation, not as a politician, but as a dedicated public servant. Decades later, President Harry Truman called on Hoover to lead post-World War II food relief efforts in Europe. Once again, the man who had fed the world before the war returned to feed it again, older, wiser, and still moved by compassion. Hoover also chaired the Hoover Commission, aimed at making the federal government more efficient. He kept writing, thinking, and serving until the very end. Herbert Hoover died on October 20th, 1964, at the age of 90. By then, time had softened the harsh edges of public judgment. People remembered the orphan who became a global humanitarian, the engineer who helped feed nations, and the man who, though not a successful president, was a remarkable human being. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was born on January 30th, 1882, amidst the grand, whispering hills of Hyde Park, New York, a place where rolling trees swayed gently in the Hudson River winds, and wealth was as quiet as the soft carpets beneath polished floors. He was the only child of James Roosevelt, a wealthy railroad vice president, and Sarah Delano Roosevelt, a fiercely devoted mother whose influence would shape her son far beyond his childhood years. From a young age, Franklin was raised not to work, but to lead. Before he could even ride a horse properly, he spoke French, and tutors came regularly. Latin was a language served at breakfast, and summers were spent traveling through Europe. He sailed on grand ships, read endlessly, and wore silk shirts meticulously pressed with his mother's precision. He was a golden boy, the chosen one in a family that spoke in calm, measured tones, and dined beneath sparkling chandeliers. Yet privilege did not shield him from destiny's tests. At Harvard University, Franklin was charming and sociable, but not the most academic student. He was drawn more to lively conversations than to the pages of textbooks. As editor of the Harvard Crimson, he smiled often and made many important connections. During these years, he became captivated by his distant cousin, the magnetic and mustachioed President Theodore Roosevelt. Teddy's bold swagger ignited something inside Franklin, a belief that he could be more than just an observer. He could become a leader. After Harvard, Franklin attended Columbia Law School. Though he found the law dull and passed the bar exam more through effort than passion, he emerged a young lawyer with ambition and a confident, elegant gait. In 1905, he married Eleanor Roosevelt, his fifth cousin once removed, in a ceremony that would change the course of a nation. Eleanor was brilliant, shy, and deeply observant. Her uncle was none other than President Theodore Roosevelt, who walked her down the aisle. Together, Franklin and Eleanor formed a pair who, while mismatched in temperament, he sunny, smooth, and social. She serious, sensitive, and independent were destined for a profound and sometimes painful bond. Politics came naturally to Franklin. In 1910, he was elected to the New York State Senate, where his name, charm, and confidence quickly made him a rising star in the Democratic Party. Later, under President Woodrow Wilson, Franklin was appointed Assistant Secretary of the Navy in 1913. He adored the job, the power, the uniforms, the sense of mission. During World War I, he worked tirelessly to modernize the Navy, visited war fronts, and dreamed of one day following Wilson into the White House. In 1920, Franklin ran as the Democratic vice presidential candidate, but the ticket lost. Regardless, his name had become well known. The spotlight had found him. Then, in 1921, while vacationing on Campobello Island, Franklin was struck by a sudden fever. Within days, he lost the ability to walk. The diagnosis was polio. At 39 years old, a man bred for motion and leadership was now paralyzed from the waist down. Many believed his political career was over. A crippled man could not be president, but Franklin refused to surrender. He spent years fighting through water therapy, wearing metal braces, and relying on sheer willpower. Though he never walked unaided again, he trained himself to appear as though he could. He taught himself to stand, to grip podiums tightly enough to hide the truth. Behind closed doors he struggled. In public he smiled. Through his pain he found empathy, a connection to the fear, pain, and quiet despair of everyday people. Polio did not end his life. It forged his soul. In 1928, Franklin became governor of New York. His leadership during the early days of the Great Depression was bold and compassionate. He launched relief programs, public works, and direct aid, believing firmly that government could and should help its people. By 1932, the nation was drowning in economic collapse. President Hoover appeared helpless as banks failed, unemployment soared, and bread lines wrapped around city blocks. The American people were desperate for hope, and they turned to Roosevelt. He won the presidency in a landslide. In March 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt took office as President of the United States. During his first 100 days, he passed an avalanche of legislation: the New Deal, banking reforms, emergency relief, massive infrastructure projects, and programs like the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Works Progress Administration, the Tennessee Valley Authority, and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation were born. He created Social Security, put millions of people to work, and spoke directly to Americans through his fireside chats on the radio. His warm voice reached into living rooms, offering comfort and reassurance. He didn't fix everything, but he restored faith. He was elected 4 times, the only president to serve more than 2 terms. Through the Depression, the Dust Bowl, and the rise of fascism, Roosevelt remained calm, confident, and determined. Then came war. In 1939, when Hitler invaded Poland, World War II began. Roosevelt tried to keep America neutral, but he knew it was only a matter of time. On December 7, 1941, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, Roosevelt delivered one of the most iconic speeches in history, calling it a date which will live in infamy. The United States entered the war, and Roosevelt became a wartime president. He worked closely with Churchill and Stalin, created the Lend-Lease Act, mobilized American industry, and led the Allies toward victory. Behind the scenes, his health was failing. He looked older, thinner, worn down by the burdens he carried. Yet in 1944, he ran for a 4th term and won. In April 1945, just months into his 4th term, Roosevelt traveled to Warm Springs, Georgia, his beloved retreat for polio patients. There, on April 12th, he suffered a massive cerebral hemorrhage and died at the age of 63. The world mourned. Soldiers wept openly. Ordinary people cried in kitchens, on farms, and in factories. Vice President Harry S. Truman said simply and truly that Roosevelt belonged to the world, to history, and to all of us. Franklin Delano Roosevelt changed the presidency forever. He made it a force for direct action, believing that government had a duty to care for its people, not as a handout, but as a promise. He led America through its darkest economic hours and into the dawn of victory in the greatest war ever fought. His face is on the dime, his words still echo, and his courage. Behind a podium, behind a smile, behind paralyzed legs, remains one of the most powerful testaments to resilience the world has ever seen. Harry S. Truman was born on May 8, 1884, in the small town of Lamar, Missouri. Unlike many presidents who came from privilege or long political legacies, Harry arrived with no fanfare, no silver spoon, and no grand expectations. His parents, John and Martha Truman, were humble farmers who worked the land with quiet determination. Interestingly, the S in his name didn't stand for any specific name. It was simply a tribute to both of his grandfathers, Solomon and Anderson. As a boy, Harry was quiet, kind, and endlessly curious. He wore thick glasses and a red vest, and he loved to read everything from the Bible to Shakespeare to history books. He played the piano beautifully, a talent he cherished deeply. Most of all, he adored his mother and often repeated her simple but powerful words. "Be good, Harry." working on the family farm, plowing fields, tending crops, and building fences. He grew a quiet resilience that few saw coming. No one expected that this modest boy from Missouri would one day become president. Not even Harry himself. When World War I erupted, Harry volunteered for the army despite having poor eyesight. He trained in Oklahoma, where he learned a crucial lesson. Respect is earned not through force, but through fairness. Sent to the front lines in France in 1918, Truman led a battery of artillerymen under heavy fire. He proved himself brave and steady, earning the deep respect of his men. Throughout the war, he wrote heartfelt letters home to his beloved Bess Wallace, his childhood crush since he was 6 years old. After the war, Harry returned to Missouri and married Bess. Together, they tried to run a haberdashery, a men's clothing store, with a friend. At first, it saw some success, but the early 1920s brought hard times and the business failed. Still, Truman refused to give up or declare bankruptcy. For 15 years, he paid off every cent of his debts, despite having no steady job or real prospects. This period shaped his character, teaching him responsibility, grit, and the value of hard work. Politics came into Truman's life through Tom Pendergast, a powerful political boss in Kansas City. Truman didn't particularly like the connection, but understood it was his way in. He was elected as a county judge, and then, in 1934, became a U.S. Senator. In Washington, people often underestimated this plain-spoken man from Missouri. But Truman listened, worked hard, and earned a reputation for honesty, practicality, and relentlessness. During World War II, he chaired the Truman Committee, which investigated defense spending and saved the country billions of dollars. By 1944, with Franklin D. Roosevelt needing a new vice president, party leaders chose Truman, a safe, modest man with few enemies. He accepted the role humbly and served as vice president for only 82 days. Then, on April 12, 1945, Roosevelt died suddenly, and Harry Truman became president. There is a famous story that when Eleanor Roosevelt told Truman the news of FDR's death, he asked her, "Is there anything I can do for you?" She replied, "Is there anything we can do for you? You're the one in trouble now." And indeed, Truman was thrust into the most challenging job in the world. The war in Europe was nearly over, but in the Pacific, the Japanese refused to surrender. On Truman's desk lay a secret that few knew about before he became president, the Manhattan Project and its atomic bomb. Now, he alone had to decide whether to use it. On August 6, 1945, the first bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. 3 days later, Nagasaki was devastated. The world changed forever. Japan surrendered, and World War II came to an end. Truman's decision remains one of history's most debated moments. For him, however, it was simple. It saved lives and stopped future suffering. He never apologized and bore the burden like a soldier bears his weight, with quiet endurance. With the war over, Truman faced the daunting task of peace. He helped found the United Nations and supported the Marshall Plan, which rebuilt Europe from ruins. He recognized the new state of Israel and boldly implemented the Truman Doctrine, pledging American support to nations threatened by communism. One of his most courageous acts was the desegregation of the U.S. military, a bold step toward civil rights in America. In 1948, despite being mocked by newspapers as unelectable, Truman ran for re-election. Early editions even printed headlines announcing his defeat. Yet, in one of the greatest political upsets in history, he won against all odds. Holding up that famous newspaper with the headline, "Dewey defeats Truman," he smiled as wide as the Missouri sky. The Cold War settled over the world like a chill frost. The Berlin airlift saved a city from starvation, and in 1950, the Korean War broke out. Truman committed troops without a formal declaration of war, setting a precedent that echoed for decades. At home, he clashed with Congress, vetoed bills, and fought for national health insurance, though unsuccessfully. He faced strikes, criticism, and the growing fears of the Cold War, but through it all, he stayed true to his sign on the desk. The buck stops here. No excuses, no blame shifting. Just leadership. In 1952, Truman chose not to run for another term. He returned to Missouri with Bess, settling into a simple house in Independence. He walked daily, wrote his memoirs by hand, and famously insisted on answering his own telephone. Refusing to cash in on his fame, Truman lived modestly, even paying for his own postage stamps. He died on December 26, 1972, at the age of 88, and the nation mourned deeply. Harry Truman was never flashy or charismatic, but he was honest, courageous, and utterly human. He took on the toughest job in the world and led with conscience. He made history not with ego, but with duty. Over time, history judged him not just as a caretaker, but as a builder, a moral compass and a president who stood firm, made the hard calls, and never looked back. Dwight David Eisenhower, known simply as Ike since his childhood, entered the world on October 14, 1890, in the small town of Denison, Texas. Yet it was the flat, wide farmlands of Abilene, Kansas, where he grew up that truly shaped the man he became. One of 7 brothers, Ike was raised in a modest working-class family deeply rooted in strong religious values and personal discipline. His mother, Ida, was gentle but firm, guiding the household with quiet strength, while his father, David, was a calm and reserved man. Life in the Eisenhower home was humble and shared. Chores divided among the boys, hand-me-down clothes passed along, and big dreams quietly nurtured. As a boy, Ike loved history, fishing, and football. He had a fiery temper, once punching a tree until his knuckles bled after being denied permission to go trick-or-treating. But he also showed remarkable humility, even choosing to repeat a school year so a younger brother would not be left behind. Leadership was already part of him before he even realized it. In 1911, after some uncertain attempts at career choices, Eisenhower earned a place at the prestigious West Point Military Academy. Though he never topped his class, he impressed his professors with a unique blend of logic, charm, and relentless perseverance. Graduating in 1915, he became part of what history calls the class the stars fell on. a group of future generals destined to lead America through its greatest challenges. World War I was raging when Ike was commissioned, but he never saw combat. Instead, he spent the war-training tank crews and immersing himself in military theory with a quiet obsession. In 1916, he married Mamie Dowd, a sharp-witted and patient socialite from Iowa. Their marriage, marked by deep affection, long separations, and shared resilience, brought 2 sons into their lives. Though the tragic loss of one left a lasting scar Ike never spoke about, Eisenhower's rise to fame came during the Second World War. Though he never led troops into battle personally, his extraordinary skill in logistics, coordination, and diplomacy caught the eye of top military leaders, including General George Marshall. By 1943, Ike was named Supreme Commander of the Allied forces in Europe, tasked with uniting armies from America, Britain, France, Canada, and many other nations. His challenge was immense, not only to plan the most complex military operation in history, but also to manage the massive egos and political tensions of Allied leaders. On June 6, 1944, under Eisenhower's steady leadership, Allied forces launched the invasion of Normandy, known as D-Day. The operation was brutal and bloody, but its success cracked Hitler's grip on Europe and shifted the tide of the war. Humble and aware of the stakes, Eisenhower even wrote a letter accepting full responsibility if the invasion failed. Yet it did not. After the war, Eisenhower briefly served as president of Columbia University and then became the first Supreme Commander of NATO, earning admiration worldwide for his fairness, warmth, and unwavering calm. Both political parties courted him, but he chose the Republican Party. In 1952, with the catchy slogan, "I like Ike everywhere," he won the presidency by a landslide, even though he had never held elected office before. From 1953 to 1961, Eisenhower's presidency was marked by quiet competence, rather than fiery speeches or sweeping ideology. He balanced the federal budget, steered America clear of war, negotiated peace in Korea, warned against nuclear escalation, and championed diplomacy over conflict. At home, he expanded Social Security, supported the GI Bill, and signed the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, creating the Interstate Highway System, America's largest public works project ever. Eisenhower also took a strong stand on civil rights, sending federal troops to Little Rock, Arkansas, in 1957 to protect black students entering a previously all-white school. He did not shout slogans. He acted with deliberate strength, believing that stability was itself a form of power. Beneath his calm exterior lay a deep awareness of danger. In his farewell address, he famously warned the nation about the growing influence of the military-industrial complex, a powerful alliance between the armed forces and defense industries that, he feared, could threaten American democracy and freedom. After leaving office in 1961, Eisenhower returned to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, to a simple farmhouse where he enjoyed playing golf, writing memoirs, and welcoming visitors. When John F. Kennedy was inaugurated, Eisenhower stood behind him with quiet pride and respect, symbolizing the peaceful transition from the age of war to that of youth and hope. Dwight D. Eisenhower passed away on March 28, 1969, at the age of 78. His last words were simple and heartfelt. "I want to go, God, take me." Ike was not a man of thunderous speeches or flashy charisma. Instead, he was a steady force who held the world together in its most fragile moments. He planned D-Day, built highways that connected a nation, guided the Cold War with a firm but calm hand, and bore the heavy weight of leadership lightly when others might have faltered. Today, Eisenhower remains one of the most respected presidents in American history. A man of quiet dignity, unwavering courage, and a lasting belief that peace must be carefully planned and fiercely protected. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, known as Jack to those close to him, was born on May 29, 1917, in the quaint town of Brookline, Massachusetts. He came into a world of polished shoes, Harvard ties, and quiet but high expectations. Jack was the second son of Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., a wealthy businessman and political power player, and Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy, the daughter of a mayor. The Kennedys were not just rich, they were building a legacy, a dynasty meant to shape the future of America. Though Jack faced many health challenges growing up, scarlet fever, back problems, and digestive troubles, his spirit remained lively and sharp. From an early age, he devoured books, read widely, and developed a quick wit that drew people in. His older brother, Joe Jr., was initially seen as the family's future president, but fate had other plans. Jack's charm and intelligence gradually put him in the spotlight. He attended Harvard University, where he studied international affairs and wrote an honors thesis called Why England Slept, which later became a best-selling book. Politics fascinated him, the power, the history, the turning points that shaped the world. When World War II erupted, Jack joined the Navy and took command of a patrol torpedo boat, the PT-109, in the Pacific. In 1943, his boat was rammed by a Japanese destroyer, leaving his crew stranded in shark-infested waters. Despite his own injuries, Jack swam miles, towing a wounded sailor by gripping the life jacket strap between his teeth. His bravery and determination saved many lives. Though he rarely spoke of this heroism, it marked him forever. However, chronic back pain from the accident haunted him for the rest of his life. After the tragic death of his brother Joe Jr. in combat, Jack was propelled into politics. In 1946, he won a seat in Congress, then later in the Senate. In 1953, he married Jacqueline Bouvier, a sophisticated journalist who would become an icon in her own right. Their marriage was elegant and magnetic, blending Jack's sunny charm with Jackie's serious, thoughtful nature. Behind the scenes, Jack battled Addison's disease, relying on daily injections to survive, but publicly he dazzled. His speeches stirred hearts and minds alike, full of poetic idealism. At just 43 years old in 1960, he ran for president against Richard Nixon. Their debates were the first ever televised, and Jack's calm confidence stood in sharp contrast to Nixon's nervous sweat and pale face. The nation fell in love, and Jack won by one of the closest margins in American history. On January 20th, 1961, Jack was inaugurated. Snow dusted the Capitol, Robert Frost recited poetry, and Kennedy delivered a speech that would echo through generations. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. The White House came alive with Jackie's grace and style, and the country watched as a new era, known as Camelot, blossomed, a time of youth, hope, and cultural change. But the presidency was no fairy tale. In his first months, Jack faced the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, a CIA-backed attempt to overthrow Cuba's Castro, which embarrassed his administration. Taking full responsibility, he learned hard lessons. Then came the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. The closest the world has ever come to nuclear war. Soviet missiles in Cuba, tense negotiations, military advisors urging attack. Yet Jack held firm, choosing diplomacy, a naval blockade, and calm communication with Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. The world stepped back from the brink, and Kennedy emerged stronger, wiser, and unshaken. Kennedy launched the bold and expensive space race, promising to send a man to the moon before the decade's end. To him, it symbolized limitless possibility. Back home, the civil rights movement gained momentum. Initially cautious, not wanting to lose Southern support, Jack grew into a leader for equal rights. Under pressure from activists like Martin Luther King Jr., he gave a landmark national address in 1963, declaring civil rights a moral issue. He proposed the Civil Rights Act and helped shift the soul of the nation toward justice. On November 22, 1963, tragedy struck. Kennedy rode in an open-top car through Dallas, Texas, waving and smiling beside Jackie, who wore a pink suit. At 12:30 p.m., shots rang out. He was hit twice. The motorcade rushed him to Parkland Hospital, but it was too late. Jack was only 46 years old. The nation was shattered. People wept openly in streets. Children wondered if the world was ending. Jackie refused to change out of her blood-stained dress, saying, "Let them see what they've done." Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in hours later aboard Air Force One. Camelot was gone. Kennedy was laid to rest in Arlington National Cemetery beneath an eternal flame, lit by Jackie herself. He became more than a man. He became a symbol of youth, possibility, and dreams unfinished. His vision for civil rights was carried forward by Johnson. His dream of reaching the moon was fulfilled in 1969. His words still echo in speeches, classrooms, and hearts around the world. Flawed and complex, brilliant yet reckless, Kennedy kept secrets, took risks, and lived with pain. Through it all, he inspired a nation. He made people believe they could serve something greater than themselves, building a legacy that endures. Lyndon B. Johnson was born on a late summer day, the 27th of August, 1908, in a small farmhouse near Stonewall, Texas. The land around him was dusty and stubborn, with sunrises earned through hard work and grit. His father, Sam Johnson, had once served as a legislator in Texas, but financial troubles had left the family nearly penniless. Growing up, Lyndon was barefoot at times, scrappy and quick-witted, always watching closely the world around him. Poverty and injustice were not distant ideas. They were realities he lived with every day. But unlike many hardened by hardship, he carried these experiences inside like a small fire, fueling his determination. Lyndon went to Southwest Texas State Teachers College, where he became a teacher for poor Mexican-American children in tiny, crowded classrooms. There, he saw hunger, hope, and the desperate potential of education. He wasn't chasing power for its own sake. He wanted to make a real difference. In 1937, Lyndon won his first seat in Congress during the time of Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, a period of hope and change. FDR quickly noticed him and affectionately nicknamed him Landslide Lyndon, a cheeky nod to the razor-thin margin by which he had won. Johnson worked tirelessly, learning the ways of Washington inside and out. He charmed, bargained, and sometimes bullied his way through politics, calling in favors like thunder calls down rain. In 1948, he won a controversial Senate seat again by the slimmest margin, just 87 votes, sparking whispers of fraud, but also cementing his nickname. Now Landslide Lyndon wore it with a wink. In the Senate, he rose fast. By 1954, he became the youngest Senate Majority Leader in history. He was not just a title holder. He ran the Senate, twisting arms, flipping votes, and reading people like open books. He was rough, brilliant, unforgettable. When John F. Kennedy asked Lyndon Johnson to be his running mate in 1960, many saw it as an odd pairing. Kennedy was young, elite, and from the North. Johnson was older, earthy, and pure Texas. Yet their partnership helped win the crucial southern states. As vice president, Johnson found himself pushed to the sidelines. JFK's inner circle often mocked his style. Used to commanding rooms, Johnson was now kept in the shadows, and he hated it. But he waited. Then, on November 22nd, 1963, everything changed. President Kennedy was assassinated, and Lyndon Baines Johnson became president within hours. Taking the oath aboard Air Force One, with Jackie Kennedy standing beside him in her blood-stained suit, Johnson was calm, somber, and steady. He promised continuity, but what followed was a revolution. Inspired by Kennedy's vision and driven by his own ambition, Johnson poured the full weight of the presidency into a plan grander than any since FDR's The Great Society. Johnson launched a sweeping agenda aimed at ending poverty and promoting racial justice. In 1964, he signed the Civil Rights Act, banning segregation in public places. The following year, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 protected African Americans' right to vote. Medicare and Medicaid were created, offering health care to the elderly and the poor. His war on poverty expanded education, food assistance, and job training programs. It was ambitious, expansive, and compassionate. Johnson declared, "This administration today, here and now, declares unconditional war on poverty in America." For a time, his efforts worked. Poverty rates dropped, doors opened, and hope returned to forgotten communities. Yet history never spares anyone a simple legacy. While Johnson fought poverty at home, another war was escalating abroad. The Vietnam conflict, at first small in scale, exploded under Johnson's watch. Fearful of letting communism spread and determined not to appear weak, he sent more troops. By 1968, over 500,000 American soldiers were fighting in Vietnam. Televised images showed burning villages and flag-draped coffins. Protests erupted, students marched, and cities boiled with unrest. Johnson was heartbroken. He once said, "I can't get out, I can't finish it, and I can't win it." The war consumed his presidency, overshadowing even his great society achievements. On March 31st, 1968, in a shock to the nation, Johnson announced he would not seek nor accept his party's nomination for another term. He retired to his beloved ranch in Texas, where the land whispered and rivers rolled quietly. There he wrote his memoirs, smoked heavily, and watched the country from a distance, proud but weary, still dreaming of what might have been. On January 22nd, 1973, just one day after what would have been the end of his second term, Lyndon Baines Johnson died of a heart attack. Johnson remains one of the most complex presidents in American history. He lifted millions out of poverty, gave voice to the voiceless, transformed health care, and redefined the role of government in human dignity. Yet he also presided over one of the nation's most divisive wars, leaving America fractured and grieving. He used power not as decoration, but as a tool, a force for change, relentless and unyielding. Richard Milhous Nixon was born on January 9, 1931, in a modest home in Yorba Linda, California. His upbringing was shaped by a family rooted in quiet hard work and strong Quaker values. Life wasn't easy for young Richard. 2 of his brothers died early, casting a shadow of grief over the household. Despite this, Nixon showed early signs of brilliance, though he was shy and sensitive. His ambition burned quietly inside him, a fire that pushed him forward even in difficult times. Though Nixon earned a scholarship to Harvard, financial limits forced him to attend Whittier College instead. There, he made a name as a sharp debater, known for outthinking opponents even if he wasn't always liked. After studying law, he served in the Navy during World War II, returning home with resilience rather than medals. His political career began in 1946 when he ran for Congress, quickly becoming known as a fierce anti-communist fighter, exposing a Soviet spy ring in the Alger Hiss case. This success helped propel him to the Senate and eventually to the vice presidency under Dwight D. Eisenhower. As vice president, Nixon was young, loyal, and tireless, yet often awkward in public. The press was critical of him, noticing his nervousness on camera and sensing a guarded nature behind his eyes. Despite this, Nixon was highly intelligent and strategic. When accused of misusing campaign funds in 1952, he delivered the famous Checkers speech, an emotional, calculated plea to the public that saved his career by appealing directly to their trust. even mentioning his family dog, Checkers. Nixon served as vice president for 8 years, respected but never truly beloved. In 1960, he ran for president against John F. Kennedy. The first-ever televised debates played a crucial role, as Kennedy appeared confident and polished, while Nixon looked pale and nervous, a difference that helped Kennedy narrowly win. In 1962, Nixon ran for governor of California, but lost again, leading to a bitter moment where he declared he wouldn't be kicked around anymore. Yet Nixon's political story was far from over. In 1968, amid the turmoil of war protests and social unrest, he returned as a candidate promising law and order, peace in Vietnam, and restoration of dignity to the presidency. This time he won, becoming the 37th President of the United States. Nixon's foreign policy achievements were significant. With his advisor Henry Kissinger, he reshaped global diplomacy. In 1972, he made a historic visit to China, opening relations after decades of silence. He signed important arms control agreements with the Soviet Union and carefully withdrew U.S. troops from Vietnam through a policy called Vietnamization. At home, however, Nixon's presidency was overshadowed by scandal. In 1972, 5 men were caught breaking into the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate complex. What began as a minor break-in soon unraveled into a massive cover-up involving the president himself. Investigative journalists Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein uncovered the truth, and as courts demanded evidence and staff resigned, Nixon's recorded Oval Office conversations revealed attempts to obstruct justice. As the pressure mounted and his own party turned against him, Nixon faced almost certain impeachment. On August 8, 1974, he became the first U.S. president to resign. The next day, he left Washington aboard Marine One, waving farewell before disappearing into the clouds. His successor, Gerald Ford, granted Nixon a full pardon, a controversial decision that spared him from trial but divided the nation. Nixon lived the rest of his life quietly in California, writing books and giving interviews. Over time, he regained some respect, especially for his foreign policy skills. When he died in 1994, world leaders praised his mind, and presidents sought his advice privately. Yet, the scandal left a permanent mark on his legacy. Richard Nixon's life is a story of contrasts. He created the Environmental Protection Agency and quietly advanced civil rights. He changed the course of global diplomacy, but misused his power and damaged democracy. His rise and fall resemble a modern tragedy, a brilliant man undone not by his enemies, but by his own actions. Gerald Ford's calm presidency that followed was a time for healing after the storm of Nixon's era. Gerald Rudolph Ford, Jr., was born Leslie Lynch King, Jr. on July 14, 1913, in Omaha, Nebraska. But history had other plans for his name. Shortly after his birth, his parents separated, and his mother remarried a kind and hardworking paint salesman named Gerald Rudolph Ford. From then on, the young boy took his stepfather's name and became known as Gerald R. Ford Jr. He grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where his childhood was shaped by simple values: honesty, hard work, and a steady calmness that would define his character. From an early age, Ford was the kind of boy who returned lost wallets and addressed adults politely without being prompted. He was reliable and responsible, excelling in school and sports. Football became a passion. He captained the University of Michigan's football team and was even offered spots in the National Football League. But Ford chose a different path, one of service and law. After graduating, he attended Yale Law School and served in the United States Navy during World War II. Ford returned home with modest medals, but a deep sense of duty and responsibility. In 1948, he married Betty Bloomer, a vibrant and outspoken dancer who later became one of America's most beloved first ladies. That same year, Ford ran for Congress and won, beginning a political career that would span 25 years in the House of Representatives. Through every election, he remained undefeated, never flashy or scandalous, but always steadfast and dependable. Ford was known for his decency, integrity, and stubborn commitment to what he believed was right. He never sought glory or headlines. Instead, he aimed for balance and stability. His reputation earned him respect from both Democrats and Republicans, and he rose to become House Minority Leader, a role where he was known for his fairness and quiet strength. Then, in 1973, history called Ford in an unexpected way. Vice President Spiro Agnew resigned amid corruption charges, and President Richard Nixon nominated Ford to take his place. It was a surprising choice, but the Senate confirmed him overwhelmingly. Just 8 months later, Nixon resigned due to the Watergate scandal. And on August 9, 1974, Gerald Ford became the 38th President of the United States. He was the only person in history to serve as both Vice President and President, without being elected to either office. Stepping into the Oval Office, Ford spoke plainly to the nation. "I am acutely aware that you have not elected me as your president by your ballots, so I ask you to confirm me with your prayers." The country was raw and divided, exhausted by Watergate's betrayal. Trust in government was at an all-time low. Ford's mission was not grand reform, but healing. One of the boldest and most controversial decisions of his presidency was pardoning Richard Nixon. Ford believed the nation needed to move forward, and that a trial would only deepen divisions and prolong the wounds. The decision was deeply unpopular. His approval ratings plummeted, and critics accused him of a secret deal with Nixon. Yet Ford stood firm. He later wrote in his diary that he was prepared to lose public favor if it meant doing what he thought was right. Over time, history would judge him more kindly. Ford faced economic challenges. Rising inflation, unemployment, and energy shortages threatened the country's stability. He launched the Whip Inflation Now program and vetoed over 50 bills to control government spending. Despite a Democratic-controlled Congress, he worked to keep the nation steady through international tensions, Cold War challenges, and the fall of South Vietnam in 1975. In 1976, Ford faced a tough challenge within his own party from Ronald Reagan and narrowly lost the general election to Jimmy Carter. Still, by the time he left office, his approval ratings had recovered, and many saw in him the stability the country desperately needed. After his presidency, Ford retired to Palm Springs, California. He gave speeches, wrote memoirs, and received honors including the Presidential Medal of Freedom and the John F. Kennedy Profile in Courage Award. He lived a long life alongside Betty, watched his children grow, and remained a respected voice of reason. When Gerald Ford passed away on December 26, 2006, at the age of 93, the nation mourned a good man who had led through difficult times. Though not remembered for grand speeches or sweeping reforms, Ford should be remembered for restoring faith, leading with humility, and making tough decisions for the good of the country during a time of scandal and division. James Earl Carter, Jr., was born on the first day of October in 1924 in the quiet, rural town of Plains, Georgia, a place so small it might be missed with just a blink, yet large enough to nurture a future president. He was the first president born in a hospital, but his early years were far from comfortable. Until he became a teenager, Jimmy grew up without electricity or running water. His father, James Earl Carter, Sr., was a strict but fair farmer and businessman. His mother, Lillian, was a compassionate nurse who often cared for people of all races without asking for payment, a brave act in a deeply segregated South. From an early age, Jimmy absorbed his father's discipline and his mother's empathy. He worked on the family peanut farm, repairing fences, tending crops, and quietly observing the world with gentle, curious eyes. Growing up in the Jim Crow South, he questioned the unfairness around him even before he had the words for justice. A gifted student, Carter enrolled at the United States Naval Academy and graduated in 1946 among the top 10% of his class. Soon after, he married Rosalind Smith, his childhood neighbor and lifelong partner, who would stand by him through politics and purpose. Carter served as a nuclear engineer in the Navy under Admiral Hyman Rickover, an experience that instilled in him precision, responsibility, and an obsession with details. He might have had a long military career, but in 1953, after his father died of cancer, Carter resigned and returned to Plains to manage the family peanut farm, just as his father had before him. Yet farming did not quiet his restless mind. Politics called him. In 1962, Carter was elected to the Georgia State Senate. As a white man in the Jim Crow South, he took a courageous stance by refusing to side with segregationists. His moral compass was fixed on justice, even when it cost him friends. By 1970, Carter ran for governor of Georgia. Although he used coded language to appeal to voters, he surprised many by declaring in his inaugural speech that the time for racial discrimination was over. This marked a turning point. As governor, he reformed state government, focused on civil rights, improved education, and championed environmental policies. His leadership attracted national attention as a Southern Democrat who did not wear hate on his sleeve. By 1976, after the Watergate scandal had shaken America's faith in leadership, voters were desperate for honesty. Jimmy Carter, the soft-spoken, born-again peanut farmer with a warm smile and no ties to Washington, defeated Gerald Ford in a close election. On January 20th, 1977, he became the 39th President of the United States. Carter famously walked down Pennsylvania Avenue during his inauguration, holding Rosalind's hand instead of riding in a limousine. He wanted to show the people he was with them, not above them, and he meant it. Carter threw himself into his presidency with idealism, intelligence, and tireless energy. He created the Department of Energy and the Department of Education, deregulated airlines and trucking industries to boost competition, and pushed for human rights in foreign policy. He installed solar panels on the White House roof and encouraged Americans to conserve energy. He was among the first to speak publicly about climate change as a real and urgent threat. One of Carter's greatest achievements came in 1978, when he brokered a peace agreement between Israel and Egypt, two nations that had fought several wars. He invited Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin and Egyptian President Anwar Sadat to Camp David, the presidential retreat. Over 13 tense and exhausting days, Carter acted as a mediator, walking between the two leaders like a shepherd, negotiating, listening, and pleading for peace. The resulting Camp David Accords ended decades of hostility and brought hope to the Middle East, at least for a time. Carter considered this his proudest accomplishment and would later receive the Nobel Peace Prize for it. Yet, despite his achievements, Carter's presidency was marked by growing challenges. The energy crisis sent gas prices soaring. Inflation and unemployment rose, creating economic difficulties. His honest style sometimes seemed like helplessness to the public, and his approval ratings declined. In 1979, the Iranian Revolution overthrew the U.S.-backed Shah, and Islamic revolutionaries stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 52 American hostages. Carter refused to abandon diplomacy, trying every peaceful solution and even authorizing a risky rescue mission that tragically failed. The hostages remained captive for 444 days, a national trauma watched on every screen. Americans saw Carter as kind, but feared he was ineffective. In 1980, Carter lost re-election to Ronald Reagan in a landslide. The hostages were released just minutes after Reagan's inauguration, a painful reminder of Carter's struggles. Though his presidency was turbulent, his post-presidential years were transformational. Carter founded the Carter Center, which worked on eradicating diseases such as guinea worm, promoted free elections worldwide, mediated conflicts across continents, championed human rights, and helped build homes with Habitat for Humanity well into his 90s. In 2002, Carter was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for decades of humanitarian work. He taught Sunday school, wrote more than 30 books, painted, gardened, and became one of the most admired and impactful former presidents in history, even after being diagnosed with brain cancer at 90. He continued working, smiling, and showing up for the causes he believed in. Jimmy Carter never craved power. He carried it lightly, like a farmer carries seeds. Though not perfect and sometimes seen as too soft for a harsh world, he led with morality, faith, and empathy. In a time of cynicism, he reminded the world that decency matters. Ronald Wilson Reagan was born on the 6th of February, 1911, in the quiet town of Tampico, Illinois. A small spot in the heart of the Midwest where winters were long and dreams sometimes felt just out of reach. His father, Jack Reagan, was a struggling shoe salesman with deep Irish roots and a natural gift for storytelling, while his mother, Nell, was a deeply faithful and kind woman who passed on to young Ronnie both her belief in God and a hopeful view of the world. From a young age, they called him Dutch, a nickname inspired by his round face and haircut. Money was often scarce, and Jack wrestled with alcoholism. Yet the Reagan family made sure their children grew up surrounded by books, hope, and a belief that goodness could triumph. As a boy, Ronnie didn't just read stories. He brought them to life, turning even a snowstorm into a scene from Shakespeare. After graduating from Eureka College, where he studied economics and sociology, and took the stage in many theater productions, Reagan found his voice as a radio sports announcer. His golden voice and passionate delivery made even a baseball game feel like a grand epic. Then, in 1937, while covering the Chicago Cubs' spring training in California, he took a chance and did a screen test with Warner Brothers. Hollywood welcomed him, and soon Reagan starred in over 50 films, often playing the charming everyman or the noble soldier. His most famous role was as George Jip in Knute Rockne, All-American, which earned him the nickname the Jipper, a name he carried all the way to the White House. Though he wasn't the biggest star in Hollywood, Reagan was beloved for his reliability and warmth. Behind the camera, his political views were shifting. Once a strong supporter of Franklin D. Roosevelt and the New Deal, the growing tensions of the Cold War changed his mind. He became increasingly wary of big government, unions, and above all, communism. His politics moved to the right, but his heart stayed sunny and hopeful. Reagan became a spokesperson for General Electric, traveling the country to deliver speeches about the American dream, free enterprise, and individual liberty. His talks were polished, passionate, and sincere, a clear reflection of his belief in the power of America's spirit. In 1962, he officially left the Democratic Party, saying, "I didn't leave the Democratic Party, the party left me." The stage was set. In 1966, Reagan ran for governor of California. Many critics scoffed, calling him just an actor, but the people saw a leader. He won by a landslide, surprising many with his seriousness and discipline. As governor, he cut government spending and faced down protests, proving he could govern with steady hands. All the while, his eyes quietly shifted toward Washington, D.C. In 1976, Reagan challenged incumbent President Gerald Ford for the Republican nomination. Though he narrowly lost, his passionate speeches and grace earned him national attention. Then, in 1980, amid rising inflation, economic troubles, and the ongoing Iran hostage crisis, America was tired and anxious. Reagan stood tall, smiling, and asked the American people, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" With that simple question, he won the presidency by a landslide. At 69 years old, Reagan was the oldest president ever elected at that time. But his time in office was just beginning. Early in his term, he survived an assassination attempt only 69 days after taking office. Shot in the chest, he still managed to joke on the way to surgery, saying, "Honey, I forgot to duck." Reagan's presidency was marked by bold economic reforms. He pushed through dramatic tax cuts with his policy called Reaganomics, believing that cutting taxes on the wealthy and businesses would eventually help everyone through a trickle-down effect. He slashed domestic spending while increasing defense budgets. Inflation dropped, economic growth returned, but wealth inequality grew, with critics calling it a new Gilded Age. Millions adored him. To them, Reagan was the face of an optimistic, strong America, unapologetically patriotic and confident. He loathed communism not just politically, but as a personal belief. He saw the Soviet Union as the evil empire, yet he wasn't just about tough talk. In 1987, standing in front of the Berlin Wall, he challenged Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev with one of the most iconic lines in history. "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." This call echoed through the world, and 2 years later, the Berlin Wall did indeed fall. Reagan and Gorbachev formed an unexpected friendship, working together to sign landmark arms reduction treaties like the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Their cooperation helped ease Cold War tensions and paved the way to its peaceful end. It was the cowboy and the communist shaking hands for the whole world to see. However, not all was smooth. The Iran-Contra affair, where the U.S. secretly sold arms to Iran and funneled money to Nicaraguan rebels, threatened to tarnish Reagan's legacy. Though he claimed ignorance of the full scheme and was never directly implicated, the scandal left a stain. By the end of his second term in 1989, Reagan left office with sky-high approval ratings. He had restored American confidence, won the Cold War, and rekindled belief in the American dream. In 1994, he announced he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, writing to the nation, "I now begin the journey that will lead me into the sunset of my life. I know that for America, there will always be a bright dawn ahead." Reagan spent his final years with dignity and grace, cared for by his devoted wife Nancy. When he passed away on June 5, 2004, at the age of 93, thousands lined the streets to honor him. Flags flew at half-staff. The cowboy had ridden off into the sunset. Ronald Reagan was a man of contrasts, a believer in small government who dramatically increased military spending, a cold warrior who helped end the Cold War, an actor who turned the presidency into a stage and made it seem made just for him. To some, he was the savior of capitalism. To others, a symbol of neglect for the poor. But love him or critique him, he mattered. He reshaped American conservatism, redefined leadership through communication, and left behind a country that once again believed in its own story. George Herbert Walker Bush was born on June 12, 1924, in the lush coastal town of Milton, Massachusetts. He came from a family wrapped in privilege, yet one where humility and service were not just ideals, but ironclad rules. His father, Prescott Bush, was a banker and a United States senator, while his mother, Dorothy, combined stern discipline with warmth. From her, young George inherited a strong sense of duty, modesty, and a charming, self-deprecating humor that would remain with him his whole life. The Bush family didn't boast or make a show of their wealth. They preferred quiet tennis matches, sailing trips, and doing the right thing even if no one was watching. Early on, George earned the nickname Poppy, and it suited his steady courage and his relentless drive to carve out a meaningful life, not just for the family name, but for his country. On his 18th birthday, shortly after graduating from the elite Phillips Academy in Andover, George enlisted in the United States Navy. He became the youngest naval aviator of his time, flying torpedo bombers in the Pacific Theater during World War II. In 1944, during a daring mission over the Bonin Islands, his plane was struck and burst into flames. Despite the danger, George completed his bombing run and then belayed out into the ocean. He was rescued by a U.S. submarine, but two of his crewmates did not survive the ordeal. The memory of that day and the heavy weight of responsibility stayed with him for life. He returned home honored with the Distinguished Flying Cross, carrying a deep feeling that his life had been spared for a greater purpose. After the war, George married Barbara Pierce, his lifelong love and witty partner who he often said made him laugh more than anyone else in the world. Together, they had 6 children, including George W. Bush, who would become a future president, and Jeb Bush, a future governor. In 1948, the young family moved to West Texas, where George stepped into the oil business. He wanted to make a life of his own, away from the East Coast's old establishment. With hard work and determination, he co-founded an oil company and became a millionaire. Yet money was never his goal. Throughout his life, public service was always at the forefront. In 1966, George won a seat in Congress representing Texas, marking the beginning of a long political career. If experience were measured like currency, George H.W. Bush would rank among the richest politicians ever. Over the next 2 decades, he wore many hats: U.S. Representative, Ambassador to the United Nations, Chairman of the Republican National Committee during the Watergate scandal, U.S. Envoy to China, and Director of the CIA. Each role shaped different parts of his character. At the United Nations, he learned the art of diplomacy. In China, he explored backstreets by bicycle to connect with everyday people. At the CIA, he restored morale after years of scandal. He wasn't flashy or loud, but showed competence, loyalty, and steadiness. In 1980, George ran for president, but lost the Republican nomination to Ronald Reagan. Reagan chose him as his running mate, and for 8 years, George served as vice president. He embraced the role with his trademark humility and loyalty, defending Reagan in times of crisis, traveling the globe on delicate diplomatic missions, and quietly building strong relationships with world leaders and insiders alike. Though people often joked about his occasional awkward speeches and Bushisms, behind those moments was a man of sharp intellect and quiet confidence. In 1988, he ran for president again, and this time he won. George H.W. Bush became the 41st President of the United States on January 20th, 1989, succeeding his friend and predecessor Ronald Reagan. At his inauguration, he called for a kinder, gentler nation, promising to be a bridge between generations, political parties, and between America and the world. History soon presented challenges. His presidency coincided with global transformations. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, and by 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved. Bush handled the peaceful end of the Cold War with remarkable restraint and skilled diplomacy. He also built a coalition of 34 nations to expel Saddam Hussein from Kuwait during the Gulf War, a swift and successful mission praised for its international unity. At home, he signed the Americans with Disabilities Act, landmark civil rights legislation. He supported clean air laws and environmental protections. Under political pressure, he broke his famous "Read My Lips," no new taxes pledge, raising taxes because he believed it was fiscally necessary, a decision that cost him politically, but one he made anyway. By 1992, America was feeling the sting of a recession. Many voters, hurt by economic struggles, saw Bush's calm, patrician manner as out of touch. A young governor from Arkansas named Bill Clinton captured the public's imagination, and Bush lost the re-election. Though heartbroken and quietly devastated, he responded with grace. On Inauguration Day, he sent Clinton a handwritten letter saying, "Your success now is our country's success. I am rooting hard for you." This gesture remains one of the most gracious moments in presidential history. After leaving office, George H.W. Bush stepped away from the spotlight. He dedicated himself to charity work, family, and shaping his legacy. At age 90, he famously went skydiving. He partnered with his former rival Bill Clinton to raise money for disaster relief, showing the world an example of post-partisan cooperation. He wrote letters, sported quirky socks, told dad jokes, and held Barbara's hand through every season of life. When Barbara passed away in 2018, George's light dimmed. He died on November 30th, 2018, at the age of 94. His funeral united presidents, political foes, and old friends, all drawn together by their respect for a man who led with heart. George H.W. Bush's legacy is often overshadowed by louder, flashier figures before and after him. But in the soft light of history, he shines as a war hero who never boasted, a president who chose principle over popularity, and a man who believed in service before, during, and long after power. He never preached greatness, he simply practiced decency. And perhaps That is exactly what history needs the most. William Jefferson Clinton III was born on August 19, 1946, in the small town of Hope, Arkansas. The name suited him well because throughout his life he chased hope and possibility. His father, a traveling salesman, passed away in a car accident before Bill was even born. His mother, Virginia, remarried a car dealer named Roger Clinton, and Bill later took his stepfather's last name. Life at home was not always easy. Roger struggled with alcoholism and was often harsh. Bill learned early on how to calm tensions and charm his way through difficult family moments. This early experience became the foundation for his skills in diplomacy, persuasion, and performance later in life. Behind his easy smile was a sharp and curious mind. Bill was a voracious reader and a budding policy expert in a state where many kept their ambitions small. He had a natural gift for words, a strong drive to achieve, and a deep sense that he was destined for something great. During high school, he excelled in studies and played saxophone in the band. In 1963, on a school trip to Washington, D.C., he met President John F. Kennedy in the White House Rose Garden. A photo captured young Bill beaming with excitement, and in that moment, a seed of inspiration was planted. He went on to study at Georgetown University and won a scholarship to study philosophy at Oxford University. During this time, he avoided the Vietnam draft, a decision that would later become a point of controversy. After Oxford, he attended Yale Law School, where he met Hillary Rodham, a fierce and intelligent woman with a strong spirit. Bill admired her sharp mind, and she loved his passionate heart. Their partnership, both personal and political, would shape much of modern American history. After graduating from law school, the Clintons moved back to Arkansas, where Bill began his political career while teaching law. His first run for Congress ended in defeat, but he learned quickly. In 1976, he was elected Attorney General of Arkansas, and 2 years later, at just 32 years old, he became the youngest governor in the country. Youth brought challenges. After his first term, voters ousted him due to unpopular taxes and some policy mistakes. But instead of giving up, he listened more and worked harder. In 1982, he won back the governor's seat, wiser and more prepared. Over 10 years as governor, he pushed economic modernization, improved education, and became known for speeches that energized audiences. Then, in 1992, Clinton aimed for Washington. America was in a mild recession, and President George Herbert Walker Bush, still popular after a war victory, seemed unbeatable. But as the economy worsened, Clinton entered the race as a relatable, smart, and energetic Southern Democrat. He spoke of growing up where hard work and fairness mattered. He played saxophone on late-night TV, jogged, enjoyed fast food and policy books alike. Despite scandals and controversies, such as accusations of affairs and draft dodging, he earned the nickname the Comeback Kid. Clinton chose Al Gore, a fellow Southern moderate, as his running mate. In November 1992, he defeated Bush, becoming the 42nd President of the United States at just 46 years old. His presidency began with a clear focus: the economy. He inherited a large deficit and slow growth. His policies included raising taxes on the wealthy, expanding the Earned Income Tax Credit, reforming welfare, and investing heavily in technology, education, and job training. Surprisingly to many critics, it worked. The economy boomed, unemployment dropped, wages increased, and by the late 1990s, the government ran budget surpluses. This decade became known for economic growth fueled by technology, globalization, and some fortunate timing. On the international stage, Clinton balanced caution with engagement. He sent troops to Bosnia to help stop genocide and helped broker peace in Northern Ireland. He brought Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat together for the Oslo Accords. A fragile but significant step toward peace in the Middle East. However, he struggled to define America's role during the Rwandan genocide, where the U.S. largely stayed out of the conflict. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton redefined the role of the First Lady. She championed healthcare reform and chaired important task forces, though she faced strong opposition for her visibility and influence. Her healthcare plan failed in 1994, but she remained a prominent and sometimes controversial figure in American politics. Bill Clinton was a gifted politician, but his personal flaws, especially in relationships with women, haunted him. In 1998, news broke of his affair with Monica Lewinsky, a young White House intern. He initially denied the affair under oath, but evidence proved otherwise. He was impeached by the House of Representatives for perjury and obstruction of justice, becoming only the second president in U.S. history to face impeachment. The Senate acquitted him, and he remained in office. Despite the scandal, his approval ratings soared as the economy thrived, and many Americans separated the political controversy from their view of his job performance. However, the scandal left a lasting mark on his legacy. Hillary stood by him publicly, but their marriage faced serious challenges. When Clinton left office in 2000, he had the highest exit approval ratings of any modern president. Afterward, he founded the Clinton Foundation, focusing on global health, economic development, and education. He gave speeches worldwide, wrote books, and remained a significant political figure. Hillary Clinton went on to become a U.S. Senator, Secretary of State, and the first woman nominated for president by a major party. Together, the Clintons became a political dynasty, admired and criticized in equal measure. Bill Clinton's legacy is full of contradictions. A progressive reformer who embraced centrist policies, a brilliant strategist undone by personal failings, a leader who lifted millions out of poverty, yet struggled with his own demons. He governed during times of peace and prosperity, inspiring millions and frustrating many, but above all, he left an undeniable mark on American history. George Walker Bush was born on July 6, 1946, in New Haven, Connecticut. But his heart was always somewhere else, beating to the dry wind of West Texas, pulsing with the scent of dust and oil, echoing with baseballs cracking off aluminum bats. He was the firstborn son of George Herbert Walker Bush and Barbara Pierce Bush, a couple destined to become President and First Lady of the United States. The Bush family name carried weight even back then. But little George, or W, as they called him down in Texas, was more prankster than Prince. He grew up in Midland and later in Houston, chasing fireflies, skipping rocks, and mastering the art of making people laugh. While his younger brother Jeb hit the books and followed rules, George was charm and chaos in equal parts. Bright and funny, yes, but troubled in ways only time would explain. In 1953, when George was just 7 years old, tragedy knocked at the family's door. His younger sister, Robin, died from leukemia. Her death left a hollow in their home that never truly closed. That loss changed him. It forced him to grow up too quickly. And then, almost as a rebellion, it made him run from responsibility even faster. Following in his father's footsteps, he enrolled at Yale University. But while the name fit, the fit wasn't perfect. He wasn't a star student, more of a fraternity legend than an academic one. He threw himself into parties, storytelling, and charm. Later, he would earn a Master of Business Administration from Harvard, becoming the only U.S. president with that distinction. But between those degrees were what he would later call his young and irresponsible years. He drifted, he drank too much. He bounced from job to job, oil fields, baseball teams, half-hearted steps into politics. He was restless, likable, but without focus. That changed in 1977 when he met Laura Welch, a quiet, thoughtful librarian with steady eyes and a calm voice. She was everything George was. They were married just 3 months after their first date. Bit by bit, Laura helped steady him. In 1986, after a soul-searching morning jog through Texas dust, George Bush gave up alcohol for good. He found God in a more personal way, began reading the Bible with intention, not just tradition. He called it his rebirth. From that moment on, he began to shape a life that was no longer about living in his father's shadow. In 1994, George W. Bush ran for governor of Texas. His opponent was Ann Richards, a witty, sharp-tongued Democrat with national recognition. Almost no one gave him a shot, but he ran a disciplined, positive, and focused campaign, and he won. As governor, he was surprisingly pragmatic. He worked across the aisle, reformed education, cut taxes, and talked a lot about personal responsibility. He didn't pick fights. He built coalitions. Slowly, people started to see something else. Maybe he wasn't just a Bush. Maybe he was a leader in his own right. By the year 2000, he stepped onto the national stage. His message was something new: compassionate conservatism, traditional values wrapped in empathy. He ran against Vice President Al Gore in one of the most bitter and contested elections in American history. It all came down to Florida. Lawsuits, recounts, hanging chads. In the end, the Supreme Court stopped the recount. Bush won the Electoral College, though he lost the popular vote. He entered the White House under a cloud of doubt, but with a plan to focus on education, tax cuts, and restoring civility to politics. Then came September 11th, 2001. He was reading to schoolchildren in Florida when the world changed. 4 planes. 2 crashed into the Twin Towers. 1 struck the Pentagon. The last went down in a Pennsylvania field after passengers fought back. Nearly 3,000 lives were lost. In the aftermath, George W. Bush found his voice. Standing atop the rubble at Ground Zero, bullhorn in hand, he shouted to the rescue workers, "I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you." In that moment, the nation saw him not as the man from a contested election, but as the leader they needed. He launched the war on terror. He established the Department of Homeland Security. He signed the Patriot Act, vastly expanding surveillance powers in the name of national safety. American forces entered Afghanistan, hunting the Taliban and Osama bin Laden. Then, in 2003, came the decision that would define his presidency for many: the invasion of Iraq. Convinced Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, Bush led the United States into war. Saddam was toppled, but the weapons were never found. A long, bloody insurgency followed. Thousands of American and Iraqi lives were lost. Critics called it a war of choice. Supporters said it was a stand for freedom. His popularity surged, then collapsed, but through it all, he never wavered. In his eyes, it was a fight worth having. In 2004, he was re-elected, defeating John Kerry in a campaign shaped by national security and wartime leadership. But the second term brought more trials. Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans. The federal response was slow, disorganized, and widely condemned. The wars dragged on. Then, in 2008, just months before he left office, the financial crisis struck. Markets crashed. Banks collapsed. Bush authorized emergency bailouts to prevent total economic meltdown, a controversial but crucial act. By the time he left office, his approval ratings were among the lowest in modern presidential history. But he left with dignity. He welcomed Barack Obama to the White House with warmth. He offered private advice. And most importantly, he supported the peaceful transition of power without drama. Then George W. Bush disappeared from the spotlight. He went home to Texas, picked up a paintbrush, and started to paint. Veterans, world leaders, self-portraits. He wrote books, opened the Bush Presidential Center, devoted time to wounded soldiers and their families. Over the years, the country saw another side of him, funny, humble, self-aware. A man who no longer needed the stage. He rarely spoke about politics. But on January 6, 2021, when rioters stormed the U.S. Capitol, he broke his silence. He called it what it was, an insurrection, un-American, wrong. Today, George W. Bush remains one of the most polarizing presidents in living memory. To some, he's the man who led with courage after tragedy. To others, he's the architect of wars that never truly ended. But above all, he is a man. Flawed, resilient, more layered and human than most ever gave him credit for. Barack Hussein Obama II was born on August 4, 1961, in Honolulu, Hawaii. a place surrounded by ocean, sunlight, and the quiet questions of identity. From the very beginning, his life was shaped by two distant worlds. His father, Barack Obama Sr., came from Kenya, a brilliant economist studying in America. His mother, Ann Dunham, was a white woman from Kansas, filled with warmth, curiosity, and a love for distant cultures. They met as students, fell in love, and soon after fell apart. Barack Sr. returned to Kenya when little Barack was only 2 years old. They would see each other only once more. And so, the boy was raised between shifting homes, shifting languages, and shifting dreams. When Anne married an Indonesian man, the family moved to Jakarta. There, Barack lived among candlelit streets and open-air markets, alongside chickens and children playing soccer barefoot on dirt roads. He did homework by oil lamp. He saw poverty and hope living side by side. Eventually, his mother sent him back to Hawaii to be raised by his grandparents, known simply as Gramps and Toot. Gramps had the grit of a salesman and the humor of a man who'd seen too much. Toot worked her way up in a bank. They raised him with love and dry wit. Barack was part black, part white, part Midwestern roots, part tropical soil. He belonged everywhere and nowhere. His name didn't rhyme with anything on the playground, and that made him feel like an outsider, but it would later become his secret strength. He was not the top student in every class, but he read endlessly. Books were his refuge, his challenge, his private world. He began college at Occidental in California, then transferred to Columbia University in New York City. He walked the city streets with headphones in his ears and questions in his mind, wondering what a life of meaning should look like. After graduating, he moved to the south side of Chicago and became a community organizer. There, in neighborhoods weathered by job loss, crime, and broken systems, he learned how to listen. He worked with churches, with parents, with those whom politics had long forgotten. Years later, he would call it the best education he ever received. He then attended Harvard Law School, where he made history, becoming the first black president of the prestigious Harvard Law Review. His intelligence was sharp, but it was his presence that stood out. Every choice he made seemed to pull him toward something bigger. In Chicago, he met Michelle Robinson. She was a brilliant attorney, confident, steady, with zero interest in dating an intern. But Barack was patient and real and persistent. She eventually said yes. They married in 1992. The ceremony was filled with laughter, soul food, and joy. Together, they would raise 2 daughters, Malia and Sasha, and build a home built not just on love, but on purpose. Barack taught constitutional law. He wrote his first memoir. He helped register voters. And in 1996, he ran for the Illinois State Senate and won. Politics had come knocking, and this time he opened the door. In 2004, he ran for the United States Senate. But it wasn't the campaign that made him famous, it was the speech. At the Democratic National Convention, he stepped onto the stage as a relatively unknown politician. And what he delivered was not just a speech, it was a signal that something new was possible. He spoke about unity, about the idea that there wasn't a liberal America or a conservative America, there was the United States of America. The crowd stood, The country listened. And almost overnight, the nation began to wonder, could this man become president? In 2008, Barack Obama ran for the highest office in the land. He faced Hillary Clinton in the Democratic primaries, a political force in her own right. It was a long, hard battle, but Obama won. Then came the general election against John McCain, a war hero and respected senator. The country was weary. 2 wars, a deepening economic crisis, and a hunger for change. Obama offered something simple but powerful: hope. On November 4th, 2008, the unthinkable happened. Barack Obama was elected the 44th President of the United States and the first black man to ever hold that title. People wept in the streets. Strangers hugged. History shifted. He took office in January 2009. The economy was collapsing. Banks were crumbling. Millions were losing jobs. Obama passed the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, nearly $800 billion to stimulate the economy. He helped save the auto industry, stabilized the financial system. He pushed through new regulations to prevent another crash. And then he did what many presidents had failed to do for decades. He reformed health care. The Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, expanded access to millions of Americans. It was controversial, complex, and not perfect, but it changed lives. He ended the war in Iraq, ordered the mission that killed Osama bin Laden, appointed Sonia Sotomayor and Alina Kagan to the Supreme Court, advocated for LGBTQ rights, helped repeal the military's "don't ask, don't tell" policy, and voiced support for same-sex marriage, a stance that shifted the national conversation. Obama was thoughtful, careful, some said too cautious, but always intentional. And in 2012, he ran again, defeating Mitt Romney and earning a second term. But not everything was triumph. He faced bitter opposition from Republicans, especially the Tea Party movement. Conspiracy theories about his birthplace spread like wildfire. Gun violence rocked the country. The massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary killed 20 children, and still, gun laws didn't change. Racial tensions surged from Ferguson to Baltimore to Charleston. And through it all, he carried himself with calm. His greatest tool wasn't just law or policy. It was language. He used words the way a painter uses color to frame grief, to stir action, to bind a divided nation. When he sang "Amazing Grace" at the funeral for Reverend Clementa Pinckney after the Charleston church shooting, he didn't just honor the dead, he opened the hearts of the living. In 2016, after 2 terms in office, he handed the presidency to Donald Trump, a man who had risen partly by attacking Obama's record and legitimacy. And still, Barack welcomed him with grace. He and Michelle walked out of the White House hand in hand, smiling. Quiet, dignified. They stepped away from politics, but not from public life. Barack wrote a memoir, A Promised Land, reflective, candid, and poetic. He founded the Obama Foundation, aimed at empowering new leaders and expanding civic participation. Michelle became one of the most admired first ladies in history, inspiring millions with her words, books, and strength. Barack Obama was not perfect. he struggled with immigration reform. He used drone strikes in ways that drew criticism. He faced endless political gridlock and a country growing more polarized by the day. And yet he brought dignity to the presidency. He inspired millions, especially young people and people of color. He modeled thoughtfulness, patience, and grace under pressure. He proved that hope isn't naive, it's necessary, and that even in a nation divided, change is still possible. Slow, imperfect, but real. He wasn't just the first black president. He became a symbol that, yes, the dream still lives.